Hello, everyone. Welcome back to OTD Military History. Today, we are going to dive back into a conflict we haven't done on the channel in quite some time. We looked at Canadian connections to this conflict a couple years ago now. But today, we're going to be looking at one specific battle with our, well, I'm calling him now. This is the second appearance. Jayson's coming back on as our kind of urban combat OTD resident expert, looking at the Battle of Hue as part of the Tet Offensive in 1968. And as we talked last time with Jayson, I have that interest as well in urban combat, and remember reading quite a bit about this as a kid, particularly, I guess, fairly young. But it'd be good to back into these details for me. And again, I'll say up top one, I don't know all that much about. That's why we've got Jayson on today. So thanks, Jayson, for coming on. I appreciate it, and good to have you back.
Well, I'm looking forward to this. I'm very excited about this.
Yeah, it's close to the Marine Corps birthday, which is
tomorrow.
A big deal.
Yes.
quite a big deal for those who know or in the know, connection to the Marines. But this one, so the Battle of Hue. The last time we talked about when you were on talking about Ortona, which I'll link down below for people to check out afterwards. Asking, your background and why you became interested in urban combat. We covered that there with your own military experience. But this one obviously has the parallels, right, with being a especially protracted urban battle. But why this one in particular is one you've looked at yourself?
Well, you're going to see a slide here. My maternal grandfather was a United States Marine in the Second World War who saw combat against the Japanese in the Pacific Theater. And so when I was, and my paternal grandfather was in the Royal Canadian Navy in the Second World War. So when I was very young, around 6 years old, I became very interested in the Second World War, and I started reading military history books, Brad, and I haven't stopped. And as a result, because of my grandfather's participation in the war, I became very interested in what they had done. And because my grandfather was a U.S. Marine, I became very interested in the Pacific theater of the conflict, while also remaining true to my Canadian roots and reading about and studying and researching, Canada's role in the war, and then that expanded. But because of my passion for military history and my passion for urban warfare history, and because of my grandfather being a United States Marine, I have a passion for U.S. Marine Corps history as well. And so studying the Battle of Hue is the perfect way to blend all three of my passions together.
Yeah, no kidding.
So that's why that's why I'm doing this presentation today for you, and I'm very excited to do it. In all honesty.
Yeah, no, yeah, it's excited and wanting to do some more Southeast Asia stuff recently myself. So conflict, like I said, I've read about a ton as a kid and haven't as much recently with everything else I got going on. But yeah, so anyway, I will pull up. All right, we got the slides up, and you have control.
Okay, thank you very much. You can see my title slide there, Brad. Good to go.
Yeah, the Battle of the Marines. Yep.
So being a Canadian in the Canadian Armed Forces now for 29 years, I always follow the Canadian Armed Forces format, and so we don't usually put a photo up. We usually have the 4 points on the title slide, and then we have our main teacher points. And so I'll start off with an introduction. And Brad, you mentioned it earlier, but when we talked about Ortona there a couple years ago, when you asked me why urban operations, I told you, but there was a couple things I left out. So now I've created an I love me slide so that I can go over my resume, I guess, as to why I became interested in urban operations, urban warfare history. And so it's all started when I was with 3rd Battalion, the Royal Canadian Regiment, 3 RCR. We'd come back from our operational tour to Bosnia-Herzegovina and the former Yugoslavia, and their commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Dennis Thompson, now retired Major General Dennis Thompson, as the battalion commander, started the entire battalion on almost a year-long urban operations training program. And It was all the hands and feet skills, as we call it, learning how to clear rooms and walk down hallways and run across streets. And then that's I think where I was bit by the bug, the urban operations bug. And I was posted to the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders of Canada out of Hamilton. And a young company commander there, Lawrence Hatfield, approached me and said, "Jay, I'm very interested in doing urban operations training." And so, well, what a coincidence, Lawrence. I just finished a year-long urban operations training package with 3 RCR. So we did 3 years of urban operations training when I was the operations officer of the unit, which means I was able to plan and coordinate all the urban operations training exercises that we were doing. And then a few years later, I was with 2nd Battalion, the Royal Canadian Regiment 2 RCR. And on the 15th of April in 2012, we had about 50 to 60 insurgents attack all of the NATO and Afghan National Army camps in Kabul, and where I was stationed. And I remember the bullets and the rocket propelled grenades and the helicopter gunships flying over my head all afternoon. And I'm like, well, this is great. I'm a major. Like, I'm not supposed to be, all the training I'd done with 3 RCR and the Argylls, it was all about clearing rooms.
Yeah.
And here I am as a major. Like, what am I supposed to be doing now? I'm participating in an urban operations battle. What am I supposed to be doing as a major? I didn't have a clue. And so I said to myself, well, if I get out of this alive, I think what I'll do is when I go home, I'll start professionally developing myself on the planning, the tactics, and the sustainment of urban operations at the higher level.
Right.
So very fortunately, got posted to the Combat Training Center's Tactics School, which is the Center of Excellence for Combined Arms Training for the Canadian Armed Forces. And very fortunately, as course officer or syndicate directing staff for the Army Tactical Operations course, the Infantry Dismounted Company Commanders course, and the Combat Team Commanders course, I was able to put together urban operations training packages from anywhere from 2 to 6 days long. It all depended on how long I had in the schedule or how long the course officers would give me.
Right.
And very luckily, we had Fredericton, New Brunswick, just 15 minutes away, which I could use as a training area for training exercises without troops, toots, for these various courses. And again, I was focused on the higher planning, tactics, and sustainment of urban operations at the company, battalion, brigade level. While I was at the tactics school, I was able to go part-time to the University of New Brunswick and acquire my Master of Arts in the Urban Battle of Ortona as my thesis, as you know. And also while I was at the tactics school, I met up with my good friend and fellow urban operations brother from another mother, John Spencer, down in the United States. He's the chair of urban warfare studies at the Modern War Institute at West Point.
Yeah.
And when he found out that I was an urban operations instructor and an urban warfare historian, he immediately exploited that and told me I was his unicorn because he had been all over the world talking about urban operations, had never met anybody like me. And that's when the bromance started between John and I.
You said it, not me.
And now we've been co-authoring articles and podcasts and urban operations case studies for the Modern War Institute at West Point now for several years. And that led to joining the U.S. Army 40th Infantry Division's Urban Warfare Center down in Los Alamitos, Los Angeles, California, where I became a senior fellow and a lead instructor for the Urban Operations Planners course. And that's an annual course that focuses on the planning, tactics, and sustainment for urban operations at the company, battalion, brigade, division level.
Oh, yeah.
And so I've instructed on that course now for 3 years. Currently with the Canadian Army Doctrine Training Center and in the Army Doctrine Center, where I'm rewriting our urban operations doctrinal publications for the Canadian military. And also working with the amazing Dr. Aditi Malhotra, who's the editor-in-chief of the Canadian Army Journal. I've reached out to all my urbanistas, and we're now contributing to 2 urban warfare themed editions, of which number 1 has already been printed just a couple weeks back. I promised Dr. Malhotra that I would plug the first editions out already. The second edition will come out in the new year, which is great.
Awesome.
And now for the past few years, I've gone all over the world, both online and in person. I speak at urban operations conferences. I attend doctrinal publication review boards. I review other countries, other militaries, urban operations doctrinal publications. And I've gone all over the world online and in person to do lectures like this, to talk about urban operations planning, tactics, sustainment, urban warfare battles. And there's not a week that goes by now, Brad, where I get requests from all over the world to go somewhere and teach the subject. So basically 29 years in the Canadian Armed Forces, but 23 years of professional, personal, practical, instructional, academic, historical, doctrinal, urban operations, experience, knowledge, and writing. And again, it looks like an I love me slide, but I try to be more humble about this. I think the urban environment is very complex and very challenging. And, even though I've been studying this for 23 years and it's never been my primary job, it's always been like just a passion. And luckily I've had units and my colonels who have been very supportive of me going out and teaching it. Like, all right, Jay, we get it. You like it. Go out and make us look good, do great things. And so I think this environment, though, I've been reading about it and practicing it and writing about it for 23 years. And I think it's so complex and challenging. I don't think anybody can be an expert in it. I know down below, you very kindly said that I'm an expert, but I
Wow.
learn something new about how to operate in the urban environment every year, every month, every week, every day. And so really, I like to be more humble about it and say I'm just a passionate student of urban operations, a passionate student of urban warfare history, because I continue to learn about how to conduct operations in this particular environment. And so if you want to say I'm a world's leading student of the subject, then I think I'm okay with that. All right.
I'm going to keep it as expert. So
Yeah. Okay, that's fine. Here's my grandfather, Sergeant Jack Gilchrist, the United States Marine Corps, the old breed.
oh, wow.
That photo of him in the right there, it's him on Guam just after 2nd and 4th Marine Divisions had taken Guam in June and July of 1944. But tomorrow is the 249th anniversary of the U.S. Marine Corps. And so this is why Brad and I wanted to do this lecture a little closer to that anniversary, because it seems more than pertinent. So I dedicate this presentation to my grandfather. Semper Fidelis, Paul, I miss you greatly. All right, so the resources there, Brad. Normally in the Canadian Armed Forces, we list the resources, but for the past few years, I've been breaking away from that template and list and showing the covers of the resources, because I find as visual learners, people remember the titles a lot easier if they can see the covers of the book. So a number of primary and secondary resources, and many of the secondary resources rely on the primary resources, which is good. And I have to give a shout out and an acknowledgement to Dr. Eric Villard. He's the gentleman in the top right corner there. He's the digital military historian and the Vietnam War historian for the United States Army. And he's written a couple of official histories that you see to the immediate left and right of his X profile there. And about 3 weeks back, when I reached out to Dr. Villard and I asked him, does he have any products or things that I can use for this presentation? Dr. Villard, and this is what I love about the history community, Dr. Villard set up a Google share site for me, and he dumped hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of photos and digital products that he's made into the Google share site. And it took me hours to review them all, but I was like, wow, what a treasure trove of history for me. And so I have to thank Dr. Villard, and you're going to see I exploit his generosity by using a lot of the photos and his digital products throughout this presentation, and I've credited those. You're going to see his name pop up in this presentation a lot, by the way.
That's good.
Because of everything that he gave to me. So fantastic. Thank you again, Dr. Villard.
Yeah, asking for the resources sometimes is careful what you wish for, because we'll dump it.
Catastrophic success. Yeah, so that was good.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. So when we write a set of operational orders in the military, we have a sub-paragraph called the concept of ops paragraph. It's just a general outline as to, the operation and the mission and how it's going to be achieved. And so the intent is what I'm going to do. So in this case, you and your program participants are going to get smart on the Battle of Hue in particular, and about urban operations in general, because I always like to draw out those urban operations lessons learned, right? As an urban operations instructor and as an urban warfare historian. Scheme and maneuver is how I'm going to do it. So I'm using a number of different products here to discuss this battle, and it's into 4 phases. The first few main teaching points are really the shaping operations, I call, where I'm setting the context in the background, and then I'll talk about the urban battle and then some lessons learned that I think are pertinent, and then a conclusion and a question period. Although, Brad, that doesn't stop you from asking questions throughout the presentation, or please feel free to do so. But I do have a question period at the end if we miss any. The main effort is usually the unit or the phase, the activity that has to receive the majority of the resources for the mission to be successful. So in this case, a majority of the presentation is on the urban fight. And then the end state is, you and your participants know a little more about the Battle of Hue, and know a little bit more about urban operations and its challenges, complexities, and necessities.
Perfect.
All right. So, Brad, very much like our discussion on Ortona a couple years back, and very much like the discussion with Paul Woodadge, with Woody, there 3 weeks ago in the Battle of Aachen, I always find it's important, and what we do in the military too, is we always investigate the ground that we're going to be fighting on. Right, because it's going to have a major influence on the military operations. So I'm going to do that here at the strategic, operational, tactical levels, the geographic and urban terrain in and around the city. So whenever we're giving orders to our subordinates, we always let them know, and we're using maps or sand models or dioramas. We always let them know which way north is.
Yes.
So north is usually at the top of the screen on most of my maps and photos and some of the graphics. If it's not, then you'll see the compass heading pointing north in another direction. But so I just won't have to keep saying it over and over again. North's at the top of the screen most of the time. So, okay, so the map on the left, when the United States was involved in Vietnam from 1959 to 1975, they broke South Vietnam up into 4 core tactical zones. First core up at the top with the provinces of Vietnam in pink, Second Corps in the middle, where the provinces are in green. Third Corps down by Saigon, and then Fourth Corps at the very south of the country. And as you can see on the map on the right, Hue is in the northern part of what was then South Vietnam. It's located in Toi Tien province in First Corps. Now, it's First Corps because that's the Roman numeral number 1, but colloquially it was called I Corps because even though it's the Roman numeral number 1, it looks like the letter I as well. So when you read most of the resources, they call it I Corps. All right. Let's go right down to Hue now. So the Song Huang, or the Perfume River, bisects Hue. And there's 2 parts to the city. There's Old Hue, which is this red diamond-shaped area here. And then on the other side of the Perfume River is New Hue, which is this blue triangle-shaped area right here. We're going to go to Old Hue and the Citadel. So present-day Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia used to be called the Empire of Annam. And there were many emperors who ruled Annam through the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries. And the one emperor, Gia Long, decided that in 1802, he wanted to rule Annam from a city that was fairly centralized throughout the empire. And so he chose this particular spot of Hue to do it. And what he wanted to build a city that emulated the Forbidden City in Peking, now modern-day Beijing in China. Right. So have a walled city surrounded by a moat, because, of course, Brad, in the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries, many cities were built with very deliberate defenses, right? Oh, yeah. These products come from Dr. Villard. This map in the top left corner is a French map from 1885. And then this map in the top right corner is a mid-20th century French map. And in the bottom right corner is the Imperial Palace. So construction on what would be called the Citadel begins in 1802 and carries on for several years with French help. And then Emperor Jialong also builds the Imperial Palace, which is this square located right here in these 2 upper drawings. And now the wall that surrounds the Citadel, it's about 30 to 40 feet high. And in some places, it's like 60 to 90 feet thick, because what they've done is they've built 2 walls with about 60 to 90 feet of dirt in between, packed in between. And then the moat, of course, is fed by the Perfume River. And then Jialong also wanted waterways through the Citadel as well for, idyllic purposes as well. And then he builds the Imperial Palace within the southeastern corner of Hue. And the Imperial Palace is also a walled palace with a moat around it. And the walls are about 700 meters long on each side, and they're about 20 to 30 feet high. So the Imperial Palace is surrounded by a moat and a wall, which is inside the Citadel, which is surrounded by a moat and a wall. So at the strategic level, the Citadel and Hue becomes a center of political and social and cultural and religious and economic influence, which is why the city has, the city's urban terrain has strategic context to it. Water features at the operational level. Water features always affect military operations at the operational level, because they act as obstacles, right? And so the main water feature is the Song Huang, or the Perfume River, and it flows from the south to the north out to the South China Sea. And then it's called the Perfume River because upstream from Hue, in the fall months, when the trees lose their blossoms and their leaves, they fall into the river, and they add a very pleasant scent of incense into the river, which is why it's called the Perfume River. And as it's not a fordable river, it's very wide and very deep, and so it's not easily fordable at all. This is why you have to have bridges across the river. And of course, the Perfume River also feeds the moat, which protects the Citadel, and it feeds the waterways within the Citadel. And then another waterway that we have to that we'll see frequently pop up on this presentation is the Phu Cam Canal, which is this waterway right here at the south end of New Hue. It feeds into the Perfume River. But as you can see from Dr. Villard's comment in the top left corner, the influence of water was just important as the influence of walls during the Battle of Hue. Why? Because water often acts as an obstacle, and you're going to see how much the influence of the water is on this battle as we go through the presentation. This digital map, courtesy of Dr. Villard as well. I like it, Brad, because the water really pops out, right? Yeah. Like you can really see the water, the moats, the waterways, the Perfume River, the Phu Cam Canal. What I also like, though, is that Highway 1, which is actually a national highway all throughout South Vietnam. It starts down Saigon, goes up the coast, and then all the way up. It goes through New Hue and then around Old Hue and then up to the demilitarized zone. Highway 1 will also play an operational effect in this battle as well. And remember, Brad, when we were talking about Ortona a couple of years ago, and when I was talking about Aachen with Woody about 3 weeks back, military commanders and planners and urban warfare historians can't be so focused on the fighting inside the city that we don't pay attention to what's going on outside the city. Because remember about Ortona, Brad, when the 1st and 3rd Canadian Infantry Brigades were fighting west of the city, and that was having an effect on the fighting inside the city, right? And same with Aachen. The fighting northeast of Aachen was having having an effect on the fighting inside the city, and it's the same with the Battle of Hue. The fighting that occurs northwest of Hue is going to have an operational effect on the fighting inside of Hue as well. And so every once in a while in this presentation, I have to pop out of the city and talk about what's going on northwest of the city as well, because it has an effect. Okay, getting to the tactical level now of geographic and urban terrain, we'll talk about Old Hue first. Of course, these walls that surround the city are very large. Like, remember I said 30, 40 feet high, and they're very thick. So they're very challenging to negotiate. So the enemy's people, when they built the citadel, they actually built a number of tunnels through the citadel so you can enter and exit the citadel itself. Now, they don't call them tunnels, they call them gates. Right. And I don't want you thinking like North American context gates, like a metal gate that swings back and forth. It's not. It's a large tunnel is what it's called. And they've actually named the tunnels. And there's 8 tunnels that enter and exit the citadel. And then there's a 9th tunnel that exits and enters the Imperial Palace. So I'm going to show you a slide at how big these tunnels are in a couple slides there. At the very north end of the citadel is the main Cail, and that is the location of the 1st Army of the Republic of Vietnam, the South Vietnamese Army, the 1st ARVN Division headquarters. The Tay Lok Airfield is located central west in the citadel. And I've talked about the Imperial Palace, but with the map now oriented to the north, you can see where the Imperial Palace is. And I mentioned, of course, the Perfume River is not fordable, so you have to have bridges across it. And so back in 1968, there are 2 bridges. There's the Nguyen Hoang Bridge, which is at the eastern tip of the citadel, located right here. And it is a vehicle and pedestrian bridge. And then the Bok Ho Railway Bridge at the southern tip of the citadel, that's a railway bridge. Hue now has 4 bridges across the Perfume, but back then there was only 2. All right. Cool. I do like this slide here because from Dr. Villard, it's a bit fuzzy, it's a bit blurry, but what it does show, it's a photo of the citadel in the 1960s. And so you can see the mixture of the geographic and urban terrain. There, the Imperial Palace is very open. There's Tay Lok Airfield, the main Cail there, but you can see the density of the urban terrain at the eastern tip, the central, and so on off to the southwest. Just going to pop out now, Brad, to one of the mapping programs.
Yep, no problem.
Here we go. So when I was commanding the Counter Improvised Explosive Devices Cell at the Tactics School, I had a geomatics technician working with me, a Canadian Armed Forces geomatics technician working with me. And I tell you, they've got some great military mapping programs. And one of them was ArcGIS. And that's what this is right here. And it's available online as well. So I'm going to zoom into Hue. And the great thing about ArcGIS is that it has a number of base maps to it. Right now, it's on the topographic base map, but you can put on imagery hybrid, which gives you a nice satellite shot with all the street views. But if I want to, I can just go to imagery. And this way, if I'm a tourist, I need to know where I can go to Google Maps and I can see where all the restaurants and shopping centers are. But if I'm an urban warfare historian, I don't necessarily need that clutter on my map, right? So you can see here's the citadel today. And you can see, Brad, it's heavily urbanized. Oh, yeah. Like it's really heavily urbanized now. Like the Imperial Palace is still fairly open, but like the Tay Lok Airfield doesn't exist anymore. Like it's gone, right? And so very heavily urbanized now. But what I want to do, this eastern tip of the citadel still very much looks like as it did in 1968, but it's very a lot of the architecture is very Asian in influence for obvious reasons. And you can see shoulder to shoulder buildings and very tight, compact, and very, very narrow streets. Right. So just want to show you that because that's what this slide shows right here. Right. And if you go to the next slide, there we can see a more aerial view of the center. You can see 1 to 3 story buildings, very tight, very narrow streets. You can see the waterways from the Perfume River that are fed by the Perfume River. They're not deep, but they're not shallow either. And so these waterways will act as canalizing terrain inside the citadel. This is from Google Maps, this aerial shot. You got the Imperial Palace off to the left with its moat, and then you've got the citadel. What I do like is it shows the width of the moat itself. Again, it's about 60 to 90 feet in length, not fordable. There's one of the gates there. You see it there. You have to cross a bridge. the Nguyen Huang Bridge. It's not called that now, but back then that's what this bridge was. And you can see New Hui off to the top right. It's heavily urbanized now with lots of tall buildings. It didn't look like that back then. You're going to see another photo in a sec. And this bridge, this is one of the new bridges. I put X's through it just so that you understand that it wasn't there in 1968. But what you do see, though, is the width of the moat here, which is why I like this photo. And now if we go to the next photo, very similar. Here's the Imperial Palace. Its walls, 20 to 30 feet high with its own gates. And now you can see New Hui in the background. In 1968, there was none of those skyscrapers or buildings there, right? So, and I very much hope, so we got the Tail Oak Airfield. An airfield, not an airport. Right. So it's only small aircraft and helicopters that can land here, but you can see there's the buildings for the airfield, but the waterways are right to the south and the east, and you can see the density of the urban terrain. So bad guys, attackers can come right up to the airfield to attack it, which makes it difficult to defend. Yep. And then the gates. So this is Dr. Villard's work again. The Anhua Gate, the Chante Gate, and the Dongba Gate are three of the gates that will receive most of the attention in this presentation because of the fighting. But here's the gates. So as you can see, this black and white photo from Dr. Villard, you can see the Vietnamese woman down here that I'm circling. Look how high these walls are, Brad. Like these are massive. 30 to 40 feet high. And look at the depth. If you can see through the tunnels there, the depth of the tunnels, right? Because again, those are 60 to 90 feet in length. And of course, what's most prominent are the towers on top of each of the gates. And of course, these towers give excellent points of observation and excellent points of fire. And if you reinforce them with sandbags, they're extremely difficult to destroy. So this is the Hue Gate on the southwestern wall, and you're inside the citadel looking out now. And here's the Tuong Tu Gate on the southeastern wall. And you're all outside the citadel looking in. There's the moat that you can't cross, so you have to cross this bridge in order to get into the gate. And if the gates are plugged the Arvin, the South Vietnamese Army does have checkpoints at each of the gates, but if you plug up these gates, it's very challenging to be able to enter and exit them.
Quick question: if you're
fire away.
Is the airfield is it Arvin run or is it U.S. run?
It's run by the Arvin.
Okay,
it's run by the Arvin, and the first Arvin Ordnance Company actually occupies the airfield when this battle starts, as well as the Black Panther, the Black Panther Company, which is the elite reconnaissance company of the first Arvin Division.
Just came back to me. I read that.
No worries.
Yeah.
No worries. We're at the northern tip of the citadel now, and this is the main caw. Now, the main caw has two parts. There's this square right here, and then there's this appendage which juts out from the rest of the citadel, this half-star appendage. Both of these areas belong to the first Arvin Division headquarters, and it's going to play a major part in this battle. But here it is at the north end of the citadel. All right, so we've done talking about Old Hui. Let's talk about New Hui. All of these buildings and urban pieces of urban terrain here all have a say in the battle. So starting at the left, the Cercle Sportif is a nightclub, Trois Tien Provincial Headquarters, the prison, and then going off to the right, we have Hui University, Treasury Building, Post Office, the Military Assistance Command Vietnam, or MACV compound, which I'll discuss in detail in a couple slides. We have Gian Darek Church and High School, the hospital, and then the An Khu Bridge across the Phu Cam Canal. Now, unlike Old Hui, which is largely Asian architecture with very narrow streets and shoulder to shoulder, New Hui, largely, although there's some bits of New Hui that are like that as well, but Old Hui, because of the French influence in Indochina from 1883 until they lost the war and between 1946 and 1954, a lot of the buildings in New Hui are very stylized on French architecture. And when the Americans come in the 1950s, a lot of the buildings have American architecture. But you can see the streets, they're very wide boulevards, right? Unlike Old Hui, where the streets are very narrow and tight. In New Hui, and most of the streets are very wide. And and so, you know, when you have troops and tanks crossing streets and they're very wide, obviously, you know, that can be a tactical threat, right? So all these photos from Dr. Villard as well, right? So you can see there's definitely two different types of terrain that the U.S. Marines are going to be fighting in when it comes to the fighting the city battle. And I love this photo from Dr. Villard. It's actually Hui in 1968. So you see the citadel on the northwest bank, and then you see Old Hui, or New Hui on the southeastern bank. And you can see it's not a large city, but it's not a small city either. And then you see the Phu Cam Canal at the bottom here. So I absolutely love this photo. And Dr. Villard has a number of points that these are going to be seen during the fighting. Okay, so Now everybody understands the geographic and urban terrain that the troops are fighting on. Okay, so now we're going to go into the background. All right, Brad, do you know what the Tet Lunar New Year is by chance?
I just noticed the Lunar New Year. That's all I know.
Okay, so the Tet Lunar New Year is a holiday throughout Southeast Asia, and what it is, it's a time for families to stop working and for several days return to their hometowns where they renew old acquaintances and see their family and friends once again. It's a very social holiday in which you're supposed to go and spend time with your family. And so, and it's, the many events include, not only meeting up with family, but having social events and suppers and dinners and, fireworks celebrations, et cetera, et cetera. And so the Tet Lunar New Year happens annually. And so during the French involvement into China and the American involvement in Vietnam, even though there was fighting going on, there was always an unofficial truce during the Tet Lunar New Year so that Vietnamese people could always return home and spend time with their families. But 1968 is going to be different because the communists have decided that they're going to take the fighting from the jungles of South Vietnam into the cities and then the towns with the Operation General Offensive, General Uprising, which will then become known as the Tet Offensive. And like I mentioned, between 1959 and 1975, the Americans have been largely fighting in the jungles. Well, the Tet Offensive, its aim is to bring the fight into the cities, and the communists are going to attack over 40 cities, towns, and military bases throughout South Vietnam, and those are seen on the map on the right. And the Tet Offensive has three objectives. One is physical, one is psychological, and one is revolutionary. The physical objective is to destroy American and South Vietnamese military units. It's strictly physical. Just we have to attrit the enemy as much as we can. The second objective is psychological. From 1959 to 1968, the Americans have been telling the world that they've been winning the war in Vietnam. So the communist offensive here is to show the world that the Americans actually aren't winning the war at all, because how can they be winning the war when the communists can launch a very large offensive that attacks over 40 cities, towns, and military bases throughout South Vietnam? And so it's supposed to, blunt the psychological hubris that the Americans have and the South Vietnamese have when it comes to the war. And the third objective is revolutionary. The communists want to demonstrate that if they can attack all of these cities and towns, they're hoping that the South Vietnamese people will rise up and overthrow the South Vietnamese government and kick the Americans out of South Vietnam. So those are the three objectives of the Tet Offensive. Now, Hue, because it's such a revered city by Vietnamese from both countries, Hue had seen very little to no violence at all. Like the war was out in the jungles. It's not in cities, and especially Hue. You don't want to damage Hue because of its political, social, cultural, and religious significance. And so that's why Hue is strategic. Now, Saigon is the most important battle to fight in the Tet Offensive because Saigon's the capital of South Vietnam, but Hue is a pretty close second. And the communists want to show that if they can seize Hue and occupy Hue, that's a strategic victory because of Hue's political, social, cultural, religious, and now military significance because of the 1st Armored Division being in at the Mang Ca and the Mac V compound being in New Hue. Now, during the lead up to the Tet Lunar New Year in 1968, something seems really amiss because a lot of Americans and a lot of South Vietnamese are noticing that, during the Tet Lunar New Year, all the shops are open and the families are strolling through the streets and they're shopping and they're eating at restaurants and they're buying, food for the big meals and they're buying fireworks. But Hue in, mid to late January 68, like, where's all the families and how come all the shops and the restaurants are closed? And look, that bordello there, that's always open and it's closed too. Right? Mm-hmm. Like there's a bordello that was open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and it never shut down. But for some reason, even it's shut down, right? So there's something going on here. And well, there's a rumor going around that the communists are going to launch this large offensive. Well, that's impossible. They really can't be doing that. They don't have the resources and the capabilities of doing that. So, something seems amiss in Hue. And geez, there's a lot of young fighting age males in the town. I wonder who are all these they're farmers' sons probably coming in from the countryside or something. That's like, there's something amiss, but it can't be a large offensive at all. That like they just don't have the capabilities of doing that, right? So there just must be rumors. There must be something else going on, and that's the general attitude. And this is another reason why the Tet Offensive is such a surprising thing to not only the Americans and the South Vietnamese, but the world.
Yeah.
Okay. Mother Nature always has a say in everything we do, Brad, and that includes military operations. And so during the month of February, there's going to be a lot of cloud cover and a lot of rain. Whenever you see a lot of documentaries on the Battle of Hue, you'll notice there's very little sunshine. When I'm talking about this presentation, I'm not talking about close air support a lot. It's only very rare when I get to talk about close air support. And even though close air support is critical in it's critical in any environment, but it's critical in urban operations. You're going to see that those missions are few and far between because there's very dense cloud cover and a lot of rain over Hue while this battle is happening. Operation Checkers is also occurring. So what Operation Checkers is it's a relief in place of a number of units. So a lot of the units that arrive in South Vietnam to begin their operational tours of duty, it occurs at the mid to end January 1968. So you have a lot of units that are either arriving from the United States or they're being moved from inside South Vietnam up to I Corps, and they're conducting relief in place. So that means a lot of the U.S. Marine Corps and U.S. Army units are very new to the ground. Now, Brad, I've done, when I was with 3 RCR and I went to Yugoslavia, I did a 2-week relief in place of 2 Patricia, 2nd Battalion Princess Patricias. But that was a peacekeeping tour. So, the operational tempo was fairly decent that we could do the relief in place fairly well. And then when I went to Afghanistan with 2 RCR again, again, the relief in place was over 2 weeks, again with the Patricias. But again, because it was a counterinsurgency, we could get the lay of the ground and understand people. But, with this is a war that's going on here. And a relief in place is difficult enough to do already under very good conditions. But when the enemy launches a huge offensive, the largest offensive of the war, it's very, very difficult. And so a lot of the units that arrive in I Corps have only been there for 2 days to 2 weeks, and they still aren't used to the ground or the enemy or know very little about that part of the country yet. And that has an effect on the battle as well. And then finally, jungle versus urban fighting. You heard me mention it. The fighting was always in the jungle between 1959 and 1968. The fighting was always in the jungle side, in the jungle. Very little fighting in the cities at all, except for the occasional terrorist act. But here, now the Americans and the ARVN have to adjust now to urban fighting. And so Captain Myron Harrington was the company commander for D Company, 1st Battalion, 5th Marine Regiment, 5th Marines. And here he is talking about how they had to adjust from fighting in the jungle to fighting in the city. And then Captain George Ronald Christmas, he goes by his middle name, Ronald. He was the company commander for H Company, 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines, 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines. And he was saying how suddenly, his Marines who were from the city were the go-to guys when it came to fighting, because they knew how, they could understand the rhythm of a city and the routine of a city and all that, right? So city fighting is going to be very, very new to the Americans as a result. Have you been able to read that?
Yeah, we have your very good contact helping us here.
Okay, good.
Has joined us here today. Eric, Dr. Villard has joined us here. Oh, sorry, I forgot you can't see the screen.
Fantastic. Good.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to talk about the opposing forces now. So, Brad, you may find this hard to believe, Brad, but sometimes historians have bias. What?
Never heard of that in my life.
No, it's true. So when I was growing up in the 1980s, 1990s, I think America was, rediscovering Vietnam and its challenges, and there was a lot of resources coming out, and there was also a lot of movies coming out like Platoon and Full Metal Jacket and Hamburger Hill. And a lot of the resources back then and some of the resources right now refer to the communists as the North Vietnamese Army, the NVA, and the Viet Cong, the VC. Now, there's some historians who prefer to use the People's Army of Vietnam to describe the NVA and the National Liberation Front to describe the Viet Cong, and that's fine. And some of those historians would probably disagree with me that I'm using, what are considered antiquated terms, NVA and VC. But, my bias is that because of the majority of the resources I have are American, and because most of them refer to the communists as NVA and VC, I bring that bias forward. And if other historians disagree with it, that's fine. They can come on and talk about the Battle of Hue, and they can talk about the PAVN and the NLF. But so largely 4 regiments from the North Vietnamese Army, which is the conventional army with soldiers from North Vietnam. The 4th NVA Regiment, which is made up of those 4 battalions, the 800th 802nd, 806th, and 810th Battalion. The 5th NVA Regiment, and although it has a number of battalions, it's largely the 416th Battalion, which is fighting here. The 6th NVA Regiment, made up of the 804th, 815th, and 818th Battalions. And the 164th NVA Artillery Regiment, although it's not artillery pieces per se, but more 122 millimeter rockets and 82 millimeter mortars.
Right. Yeah.
And then 6 battalions of Viet Cong. The resources are a little sketchy on how many, but as far as I know, 6 battalions of Viet Cong, 5 battalions of dismounted insurgents, and then the 12th Sapper Battalion, which is an engineer battalion, but it's not engineers in the traditional sense. They're largely Viet Cong who know how to use explosives. And so that's approximately about 8,000 fighters in total between the two groups that are fighting. Here's their plan, their operational plan, phase 1 from the late months of 1967 to 30th of January 1968. The Viet Cong are going to infiltrate and smuggle personnel, weapons, ammunition, rations, water, other consumables into Hue. Once they get into Hue, they're going to start conducting reconnaissance tasks to find the locations of all the military areas and all the military checkpoints, and all of the American and South Vietnamese government officials, where they live and where they work, including all of their family and all of their friends, right? And so, they have a very evil reason for that I'll explain later on. Yeah. Phase 2 of the plan will begin on the very early morning hours of the 31st of January. The 6th NVA Regiment is going to break in and gain lodgement through the southwestern and northwestern gates and link up with the Viet Cong. The Viet Cong will unmask themselves and then act as guides to bring the North Vietnamese Army soldiers to all the military locations so that they can attack them. And then the 4th NVA Regiment will break in and gain lodgement across the Phu Cam Canal, link up with the Viet Cong, and then the Viet Cong will guide them to all the military and government and political areas so that they can be attacked as well. Meanwhile, northwest of the city, the 5th NVA Regiment, and in particular its 416th Battalion, is going to be located northwest of Hue, and it will literally and figuratively hold the door open to Hue so that it can, the 6th NVA and the 4th NVA regiments can be consistently resupplied and reinforced. And this is why it's important to talk about the fighting northwest of Hue, because the 5th NVA Regiment is doing a very critical task, because amateurs talk tactics and professionals talk logistics, right? And so if you want to take this city, you're going to need lots of bullets and beans, and that's why the 5th NVA Regiment is northwest of the city to make sure that happens. I love this graphic with Dr. Villard too. It's great.
Oh yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah. And then finally, phase 3 is from the 31st of January 1968 onwards. The 6th and the 4th NVA regiments will transition to a defense, because there will be an attack by the Americans in the Arvin to try to get them out of Hue. And also part of phase 3, remember I mentioned, Brad, that the Viet Cong are doing reconnaissance tasks and noting the work and home locations of American and South Vietnamese government and military officials and their friends and family, because the Viet Cong are going to track those personnel down and execute them in a program of assassination. And so they have an extensive list of thousands of Americans and South Vietnamese people whose task is to be murdered. Yep. And this list was so extensive, Brad, that like there was a South Vietnamese government official who had a mistress who was a prostitute. Her name and where she lived was on the list. That's how extensive this list is. Any relationship whatsoever with an American or a South Vietnamese government official, your name was on the list and you were going to be targeted for assassination.
I mean, in the calculus of war, it makes perfect sense.
I suppose.
When you're when you're fighting the war, they're fighting.
That's true.
Yep.
Americans. That's my go-to joke about Americans. Yeah. The Germans when I talk about Ortona and Aachen, but Americans in the Arvin. Okay. So 3 military groups involved here. You have the United States Marine Corps, which is going to be involved inside the city of Hue. And then the United States Army is going to be northwest of Hue. And then the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, ARVN, is going to be inside of Hue as well. We'll start off with the U.S. Marine Corps. So Task Force X-Ray, which is based out of Phu Bai, which is a few kilometers southeast of Hue. It's commanded by Brigadier General Foster LaHue. His nickname is Frosty. And he has several units under his that are subordinated to him, but the units that are going to be involved in Hue. There's the 1st Marine Regiment, the 1st Marines, commanded by Colonel Stanley Hughes, and the 5th Marine Regiment, 5th Marines, commanded by Colonel Stanley Bone. Out of the 1st Marines, Colonel Hughes is only going to have 1 battalion involved in this fight. It's going to be Lieutenant Colonel Marcus J. Gravel's 1st Battalion. In 5th Marines, Colonel Bone is going to have 3 units involved. He's going to have Major Robert Bob Thompson's 1st Battalion, Lieutenant Colonel Ernest Cheatham's 2nd Battalion, and then from the 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, he's going to have L Company commanded by Captain John Niotis.
Okay.
The U.S. Army northwest of Hue is going to be the 1st Cavalry Division and its 3rd Brigade, and it's going to have additional battalions added onto it as the fight progresses. I didn't want to include them here because I didn't want to cut of the slide. And then there's Military Assistance Command Vietnam, MACV. They have a compound inside of New Hue, and it's made up of about 200 American and Australian advisors to the ARVN. And all the actors they're only advisory positions to the ARVN itself. And then there's the ARVN. So the 1st ARVN Division, located in the Mang Ka, is commanded by Brigadier General No Quan Truong. And Brigadier General Truong is actually fairly well respected. A lot of South Vietnamese military officers, they get their positions from patronage or nepotism, but Brigadier General Truong is actually very well respected because he seems to be a fighting general. He's worked his way up the ranks being a fighting general. The 2nd and 7th battalions of the ARVN Airborne Regiment, the 3 battalions from the 2nd ARVN Regiment, 3 battalions from the 3rd ARVN Regiment, and the 1st, 4th, and 5th battalions from Battle Group Alpha of the South Vietnam Marine Corps. They're all going to fall under Brigadier General Truong for this particular fight.
Just a quick question: Are the ARVN units more or less organized on the same as U.S. lines?
Yes, but they do not have the same weapons platforms, that the Americans do. So although they have like M41 tanks and M113 armored personnel carriers, they do not have a lot of the heavy weapon systems and heavy weapons platforms that some of the Americans do.
Okay.
And I'll talk about those in a moment.
Okay, perfect.
Cool. Okay, ready for the urban battle there? Ready for the urban battle now? Here we go. All right, so Brad, I'm going to get very Canadian on you here for a sec. You know when you read...
Fine by me.
Yeah, you know when you read, the official histories of Canada and the Great War and the Second World War and Colonel Stacey and Colonel Nicholson, whenever they write, they write about events in a certain order.
Yep.
And so like when I was researching the Battle of Ortona, for example, I would find that some historians would emulate Colonel Nicholson, and they would write the exact same events in the exact same order. They would just add more information into those events that they had found.
Yep.
So when I was researching Hue, I found that not all, but many of the historians would break this battle down into phases, and I put phases in quotes because, for example, they would talk about phase 1 being the NVAVC attack on the city. And then phase 2, they would talk about the fighting in New Hue from beginning to end. And then they would go back in time and then start talking about the fighting in Old Hue in the Citadel from beginning to end. And then they would stop, and then they would go back in time and they talk about fighting northwest of Hue. And so when I was writing this chapter and this case study for the Modern War Institute with John Spencer and Lynn Collins, I thought, you know what? I don't want to do that. I don't want to follow that template that most other historians have written about. I would like to do so. I would like what I did for Ortona and what I did for Aachen was go day by day, because again, I want to show that the fighting northwest of the city has an influence on the fighting inside the city as well, right? And go back and forth and show those comparisons. So unlike most other military historians, I'm going to do a day by day breakdown here and show, and every once in a while I'm popping out to talk about what's going on northwest of the city as well, because of the influences that all 3 geographic areas have on each other. Even though they're fairly independent when it comes to fighting, they're still influence each other in a certain sense, right? So, all right, so phase 1 from late 1967 to 1968, that's complete. The Viet Cong have been able to smuggle in their people and all the consumables, done the reconnaissance tasks, and they have their list of people they want to execute. That's fine. Phase 2 begins in the early morning hours of 31st January at 02:33 hours. 4 North Vietnamese Army soldiers dressed in ARVN uniforms approach the Chan Tay Gate, and they're able to ambush those South Vietnamese soldiers, those ARVN soldiers, and they're able to destroy that outpost and that checkpoint. And now hundreds of soldiers from the 6th NVA Regiment are pouring into the city, linking up with the Viet Cong, and now they're filtering throughout the city. They're going towards the Main Ka and the Tay Lok Airfield and the Imperial Palace. At 03:40 hours, there's a rocket and mortar attack on both Old Hue and New Hue, which wakes everybody up. And so the North Vietnamese attack Hue Gate, which is down here at the southwest corner. But because the ARVN are now awake, they cut down dozens and dozens of NVA soldiers who are rushing the Hue Gate. And it takes the NVA, they have to attack the Hue Gate from both sides in order to destroy that ARVN outpost. In New Hue, the 4th NVA Regiment crosses the Phu Cam Canal, links up with the Viet Cong, and it's able to take a majority of the government and military positions and locations throughout New Hue. So by first light, 6th NVA and 4th NVA regiments are firmly ensconced inside Old and New Hue, respectively, and same with the 5th NVA Regiment's 4th 16th Battalion. They're set northwest of Hue as well. But Phase 3 is actually incomplete. Why? When the NVA attacked Tay Lok Airfield, the first ARVN Ordnance Company and the Black Panther Company is able to defend itself really well at the airfield. At the Mang Ka, General Truong, he had suspected something was going on, and he's already put the message out, canceling the leave, and telling all of his ARVN units, get back to the Citadel, because I think there's going to be an attack. So right now, he gets everybody literally out of bed. It's like senior officers and financial clerks and hospital staff and even hospital patients, gives them weapons, puts them into the bunkers and the fence line, and says, we're now defending the Mang Ka. And so the 6th NVA Regiment attacks the Mang Ka, but it's not able to get past the defenses, very fortunately enough. Down in New Hue, there's a Black Panther platoon at the prison. It holds firm. And at the Military Assistance Command Vietnam, the MACV compound, what happens is the compound is rocketed and mortared by the North Vietnamese army, but then they wait 5 minutes before they actually physically attack it with dismounted personnel. And by that time, the Americans and the Australians are up, awake. They've grabbed all their fighting and dying gear, and they've already taken position on the buildings and around the compound, and they're actually able to stave off the attacks. But that doesn't stop the NVA and the VC. They continue to attack it throughout the morning as MACV sends messages down to Task Force X-Ray saying that they need help because they're being attacked on all sides by the NVA and the VC. So not complete success for the communists in this case, because there's some military positions that are still holding out. All right, so before I go on there, now this is the Tet Offensive, right, Brad? So I mean, the whole country's being attacked.
Yep.
Right, and so there's messages pouring in to Task Force X-Ray. There's messages pouring into 3rd Marine Amphibious Force headquarters down in Da Nang. There's messages pouring into Saigon. We're being attacked. We're running low on ammunition. We've got lots of casualties. Like the complete fog of war has set in all over the country. Everybody's being attacked, but nobody knows how many enemy forces are attacking you, et cetera, right? And so General Truong is sending messages to 3MAF down in Da Nang, and again, Phu Bai is getting inundated with messages. So Brigadier General LaHue, I mean, there's attacks going around Phu Bai as well, right? And so Brigadier General LaHue turns to Colonel Stanley Hughes of 1st Marines and says, the MACV compound's being attacked. Can you send anybody up there to, help them defend themselves? And so Lieutenant Colonel Gravel says, well, all my companies are pretty much engaged defending Phu Bai, but I'll pull Alpha Company out and I'll send them up. And so he tasks Captain Gordon Batchelor's Alpha Company from 1st Battalion, 1st Marines to go up. Now, it's very easy, Brad, to sit there and go, hold on. There's 3 regiments of enemy in and around Hue, and they're only sending a company up. But remember, everybody's getting attacked. Everybody's units are all over the place defending themselves, and it's the fog of war, right? And so generally he was like, well, we got to send somebody up there. So send a company at least to see if we can defend the MACV compound, right? So Gordon Batchelor, he grabs 2 times M55 trucks, and they're armed with an anti-aircraft system that's 4 mounted M2 Browning 50 caliber heavy machine guns, the quad 50s. He's driving in on Highway 1. He's approaching the Phu Cam Canal when he runs into 4 M48 tanks from the Marines. Now, the tankers don't want to go into Hue because you don't want tanks going into a city without infantry protection. And so Batchelor says, why don't you guys come with me, because we could use you inside the city and we'll be able to protect you. So they cross the Angkou Bridge at the Phu Cam Canal, and they get to a traffic circle, and they're about to cross this causeway that goes through this cane field. And as they do that, all hell opens up. And there's North Vietnamese Army Viet Cong soldiers with small arms machine guns and B-40 rockets throughout the cane field. And they strike and they actually destroy the lead tank. And there's all kinds of fire go down range. Batchelor is running around like a madman, trying to coordinate his fire and withdraw his unit, and at the same time help the casualties out. And even Batchelor is wounded in action when this occurs. But they're able to suck back to the traffic circle. And all this time, all of this is going over the radio. And Colonel Hughes and Colonel Gravel are back at Phu Bai listening to it. So Gravel turns to Hughes and goes, "I got to go rescue my guys, but all my companies are engaged around Phu Bai." So Hughes goes to LaVigne, who then goes to Colonel Robert Bone of 5th Marines, and who then goes to Colonel Cheatham of 2nd Battalion and says, "Give another company to Marcus Gravel because he's got to go save Alpha Company." And so at that point, Golf 25, which is commanded by Captain Chuck Meadows, links up with Colonel Gravel. They grab 2 M42s. Those are trucks as well, but they're armed with a 40 millimeter anti-aircraft gun on the back. And they start driving up Highway 1, where they take sporadic fire every once in a while. They get to the Ankou Bridge, they cross it, they get to the traffic circle. Alpha Company, meanwhile, has actually gotten across the cane field, but it's left all its wounded behind at the traffic circle. So Gravel organizes a group of vehicles to take all the casualties back to Phu Bai. And then he fights Golf Company and his headquarters company across the cane field. He links up with Alpha Company. And by 15 hours, they're able to get to the MACV compound, much to the relief of the Americans and the Australians who are at the compound fighting for their lives. Now, Gravel gets on the radio and he says, he says to Colonel Hughes back at Phu Bai that he's made it to the MACV compound. Well, by this time, what's happened is Brigadier General Truong has told 3 MAF down at Da Nang, who've told LaVigne down at Phu Bai, that they're completely surrounded by the North Vietnamese Army and that they're running low on ammunition. So LaVigne turns to Hughes, who turns to Gravel and says, "You've got to get to the Mang Ka and help Brigadier General Truong defend the Mang Ka." And Colonel Gravel is like, "That is absolutely crazy. Like, I barely got to the MACV compound with the forces I had. And now you want me to cross the Perfume River and drive all the way to the Mang Ka to try to save the Arvin?" And they're like, "Do it and leave and go now." So he leaves Alpha Company behind at the MACV compound so they have some defenses. And then he's going to go and cross the Nguyen Huang Bridge to try to get into the Tuong Tu Gate. So now I'm going to go to one of those mapping programs again.
Yeah.
One of the F4 maps there. And folks, I know that you like to chat on the right there, but very much like the Battle of Aachen, you might want to, with Woody there 3 weeks back, you might want to go to the full screen mode on your YouTube, because when I zoom in on F4 maps here, what's going to happen, Brad, is it pops into 3D mode.
Yeah. I was going to say, I use this because Project 44 uses the same program.
Oh, good.
First time I tried to use it, it crashed my computer.
Oh, really? Okay.
My old computer did not do well.
I'm zooming in now on the Nguyen Huang Bridge, the MACV compound. Okay, the F4 map people have done a pretty good job of digitizing most of the world, but they haven't done all of Hue yet. And this skyscraper you see, that didn't exist back then.
Yeah.
But the MACV compound is right about there. And so Colonel Gravel and Golf 25, they drive down to the Perfume River. And this is Doc Lau Park. And Colonel Gravel takes the tanks, the quad 50s, and the M42 Dusters, and he parks them here at the Doc Lau Park. And then he has Golf 25 start to cross this bridge. They get about halfway across when the North Vietnamese Army machine gun opens up from the other side of the bridge.
Right.
Doc Lau Park erupts in violence when all those tanks and trucks start beginning to open fire. And the Marines are dropping on the bridge, but one Marine is able to move forward and destroy the NVA machine gun. So Gravel and Golf 25 now cross the bridge. They start making their way down Highway 1, and they're not really meeting a lot of resistance here, which is good. But then they get to the Tuong Tu Gate, which is located right here. And what you don't see is there's also buildings here. The F4 map people haven't got them yet. As soon as Golf 25 rounds the corner and a platoon starts making its way towards the Tuong Tu Bridge, all hell opens up, and all kinds of firing positions from the Citadel Wall and the buildings over here pin the first platoon down. And there's many casualties. And what happens is Colonel Gravel realizes there's no way he's going to be able to get through the Tuong Tu Gate. And so he wants to withdraw, but he doesn't have any vehicles. And he calls for vehicles, but there's no way the vehicles are getting across the bridge in time. So they start hot wiring civilian vehicles to use as makeshift ambulances, and they have to put a lot of rounds downrange to try to get this lead platoon off this street and back onto Highway 1 so that they can withdraw. But that takes about 2 hours.
Yeah.
And they eventually draw back to the Nguyen Huang Bridge, and they're able to cross the bridge and get back to the MACV compound. Sorry, just going to zoom back out a bit here. All right. And so they get back to the MACV compound. They left around 1610 hours, but they don't get back till about 2000 hours back to the MACV compound. And Gravel gets on the radio and says it's impossible for me to get to the main caw, just absolutely impossible. Meanwhile, in the main caw, remember I told you Brigadier General Truong had canceled everyone's leave, and they're all making their way back to Hue. The 2nd and 7th Airborne Battalions run into the 806th Battalion of the 6th NVA Regiment in a cemetery just northwest of Hue, and so they get engaged there. 2nd and 3rd Battalions of the 3rd Armored Regiment, they move to the southwest, and they're able to bump into the wall, but of course they can't go through the gates because they're heavily armed by the North Vietnamese Army. So now there's a bit of a stalemate going on here. And then the 4th Battalion of the 3rd Armored Regiment comes in from the southeast, and it bumps into the 810th Battalion of the 4th NVA Regiment, and they're trading shots here. And that's what's going on the 31st. There's just these little battles happening on the perimeter of the city in the Citadel, while the NVA are still trying to attack the main caw itself. So the 1st of February, remember the fog of war is still set in. Brigadier General Hue is actually telling people that his friendly forces have taken Hue, which we know is not true at all. And MACV headquarters in Saigon and Arvin Lieutenant General Lam, there's only 3 Viet Cong platoons in Hue, and they'll be done, they'll be destroyed shortly. And even General William Westmoreland, who commands all forces in Vietnam, is telling the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff that there's only 3 companies of North Vietnamese Army in Hue, and they'll be dealt with shortly. Like, I don't know what their staff officers are telling them, but clearly they're not being given all of the information, or there's some damage control going on, right? Because this is making, this Tet Offensive thing's making the Americans look very foolish. Well, so anyway, they gather themselves up enough to understand that they've got to go on the attack. So who's going to be responsible for what? Well, you know what? We've got Americans in New Hue already, so the Americans will be responsible for New Hue. We've got Arvin units moving into the Citadel, so they'll be responsible for clearing up the Citadel. And the U.S. Army up at Camp Evans, northwest of the city, will task them to clear out the 5th NVA Regiment northwest of the city. But remember, Hue has a political, social, cultural, religious, economic significance, and so you're not allowed to use any explosive weapons. You can only use small arms to close with and destroy the enemy, and that's not going to work very well, but those are the rules of engagement that are set. All right, so the 1st of February, Brigadier General Truong's got some relief. 2nd and 3rd Battalions of the 3rd Armored Regiment still pinned here, and the 4th Battalion of the 3rd Armored Regiment is still pinned down here in New Hue, but the 2nd and 7th Airborne Battalions are able to disengage and come in through the Anwa Gate and get to the Tail Oak Airfield, which is great. By now, the Black Panther Company has made its way to the main caw. The 1st Battalion of the 3rd Armored Regiment is now in the main caw, and the 4th Battalion of the 2nd Armored Regiment lands a battalion headquarters in a company via helicopter into the main caw, but then the cloud cover gets too dense and they can't bring any more of the battalion. But at least General Truong now has some fighting soldiers within the Citadel and within the main caw, which is better than the day before. All right, so Colonel Gravel's at the MACV compound with Golf 25 and Alpha 11, and he's told there's a Black Panther platoon down at the prison, and they're holding out, but they're not going to be able to hold out for very long. So Gravel is told he's got to get down to the prison and relieve that Black Panther platoon. So, and he's getting other tasks as well. Like there's U.S. State Department officials that are trapped in this part of the city. We've got wounded that we have to get back to Phu Bai. So he takes the headquarters company of Gulf Company, what was Mike Downes, and he takes 1 platoon and he fights his way across the street. It takes him a couple of hours to do it. And then he starts clearing buildings, but it's clear that there is way too enemy for him to fight. And because of they can only use rifles and machine guns, and because the enemy is heavily defended by all the buildings, it's very tough to destroy these enemy positions. So after a couple of hours, he fights his way back to the MACV compound, and he tells Phu Bai, Task Force X-Ray, and Colonel Hughes, I can't get down to the prison at all. It's just too difficult. I can't do it at all. Second platoon goes off to rescue those State Department officials that have been hiding in their house, worried about the NVA and VC discovering them. And the third platoon runs the gauntlet and gets it the casualties back to Phu Bai. Now, on the evening of the 31st of January, because Colonel Gravel was having so many problems, Colonel Cheatham is told by Colonel Bone that he's going to have to give up another company and give it to Colonel Gravel in New Way. So Foxtrot 25, and this is commanded by Captain Mike Downes, he's going to air mobile into the Doc Lau Park on the 1st of February, 1968. And then he's got to fight his way up to the MACV compound. And when he does that, he gets there, and Colonel Gravel tells him, right, I want you to do a relief in place of 1st Platoon, Golf 25, and then get your way down to the prison. And by the way, there's a communications facility that needs some saving as well. So Mike Downes takes Foxtrot 25 across the street, does a relief in place, tries to fight his way down. It's impossible. It's impossible. They just don't have enough troops. They don't have enough firepower. So he has to fight his way back to MACV compound. And when he gets back, they radio back up to Colonel Hughes at Phu Bai that they couldn't get to the prison. But General LaHue is insistent. Get to the prison. Go again. Get to the prison. And this time, Gravel and Hughes write a very carefully worded message. And they're like, these are the reasons why we can't get to the prison. And the order is rescinded. Thank God, because there's no way they would have been able to make it.
Right.
Okay, and this evening, North Vietnamese Army Viet Cong sappers, they're able to plant explosives on the Bac Ho railway bridge, and they destroy the bridge. It collapses into the water. So remember, the Perfume River can't be it's not fordable. You have to go across the bridges to get into the Citadel or into the New Way. And so now the NVA and the VC have destroyed one of the two methods to reach the Citadel by land. All right, so here's the original Marine Corps Orbat as it was in Phu Bai before the Tet Offensive. Now, here it is as of the 2nd of February. You have 1st Marines, Colonel Hughes. He's got Colonel Gravel. Colonel Gravel has Alpha 11 with him, but he's also got Golf Company from 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines, and he's got Foxtrot Company as well. So Hughes is telling LaHue that Gravel needs more forces. So LaHue is like, right, got it. So here's what's going to happen. 2nd Battalion is going to join 1st Marines. It's going to detach from 5th Marines and join 1st Marines. And Ernie Cheatham is going to join Marcus Gravel in the fight for New Hue. So, and by the way, until that happens, Gravel needs another company. So Ernie Cheatham gives Ron Christmas the warning order and says to Captain Christmas, hotel company, you're going to be now attached to 1st Battalion. Ernie Cheatham's going to leave Echo Company behind at Phu Bai because it's engaged there. And then because Ernie Cheatham knows he's going into the city fight, he's got 3 tasks for himself. That's Colonel Cheatham up in the top left corner there. And he's Big Ernie because he's a very tall, very stocky gentleman. And he actually played in the National Football League. He played for the Baltimore Colts and he played for the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Oh, cool.
So I don't know if Norma Graham's listening right now there, Brad, but if she is, Big Ernie Cheatham is like the U.S. Marine Corps version of Big Jim Stone.
Okay, yeah, Norma's here. Yeah.
The Loyal Ladies, right? So,
yep.
All right, so Cheatham, he gives hotel company to Marcus Gravel. He tells Ron Christmas off to New Hue with you. And then Cheatham dives into doctrinal. He finds a couple of doctrinal publications. He dives into the desks and finds these dusty urban operations doctrinal publications, and he reads them because he's never done any city fighting before.
Right.
And then from reading these doctrinal publications, he realizes he's going to need as many enablers as possible, weapon systems and weapons platforms. So he sends out the remainder of his battalion. He goes, I want you to beg, borrow, and steal machine guns, ammunition, anti-tank rocket systems, CS gas, any kind of weapon, recoilless rifles, anything you can find. We're going to beg, borrow, and steal it because we're going to need them for this city fight. So this is the Orbat now. You got Colonel Hughes, who's going to move his regimental headquarters to Way. Ernie Cheatham's going to go with him. Ron Christmas is going to bring some reinforcements, and then Ron Christmas is going to fall under Gravel. All right, so Ron Christmas, he's got 2 M48s tanks. He's got 2 M55 quad 50s. He's got an M50 Ontos, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment. And he's got Bravo 11 with him and some reinforcements for Alpha 11. They cross the Ankou Bridge. They start crossing the cane field. They start taking horrendous fire. a huge explosion. The NVA and the VC have planted explosives on Highway 1, and now a huge crater's formed. The actually lead vehicle drives into the crater. But Ron Christmas, he is mission oriented. He's got to get his troops to MacV. And so he carries on. He fights through the cane field. He leaves 4 Marines behind by accident, 1 officer and 3 enlisted ranks. The officer ends up succumbing to his wounds. So the 3 enlisted ranks have to actually fight their way to MacV. And then when he gets close to MacV, he actually takes fire from some of the other Marines because they think that they're the enemy, but fortunately, there's no casualties. Meanwhile, Gravel has Foxtrot 25 and Alpha 11 clearing the buildings around the MacV compound just to give them some breathing space. Golf 25's got a platoon going to the radio station to save some people there, and 2 other platoons are going up to the university because Gravel's thinking he probably has to cross the Nguyen Hoang Bridge again at some point, and so he wants to secure Hue University because it's really close to the bridge. As soon as Hotel 25 arrives, Gravel directs Christmas to go up and get to Golf 25 up at Hue University and take Alpha 11 with them as well so that they can do the relief in place. He's going to suck Alpha 11 back to the MacV compound. They arrived just in time because the NVA put in a large attack at the Hue University. So they're able to stave off that attack. Meanwhile, Mike Downes is given the bad news that he's got to go back to the prison because the Black Panthers are still fighting for their lives there. And he tries to fight his way down, but he doesn't get anywhere close and he has to come back to the MacV compound. And you can see that 106mm cordless rifle team at Hue University. They're in the bottom right corner, Brad.
Yep.
So what they were doing, they're supposed to be, remember, they're only supposed to be using small arms, but the NVA are using 82mm mortars and 51 caliber heavy machine guns. So the Marines are like, well, I think we can use 106mm cordless rifles if the bad guys are using those. So they set up this 106mm cordless rifle inside Hue University, and they fire around, but the whole room collapses on the gun. Right, so they have to dig the gun out, and they learn that, okay, set up the gun, and they have a lanyard attached to it, and then they go outside the room, and then they yank the lanyard to fire the gun. So this way, if the room collapses, it's going to collapse on the gun and not on any people, which is good. And that's a fairly robust weapon there, right? So
big time.
Like it's got that 50 caliber rifle on the top to act as a spotting round, and then you can, so that you're on target, and then you can fire the 106mm round. But it's a fairly heavy weapon. Like it weighs about 400 pounds, but it's got some oomph to it.
Yep, big time.
All right. So the 3rd of February, the Orbat changes again because Gravel's got Alpha and Bravo Company now. So he can has his two companies, and Ernie Cheatham gets his companies back. He's got Golf, Hotel, and Foxtrot companies back under his command now. Hughes and Cheatham have now moved their headquarters now to the MacV compound.
Okay.
And Hughes wants to maintain the momentum. He wants to get the Marines into the fight right away. He doesn't want to sit there and plan all afternoon. So Colonel Hughes says to Gravel, right, 1-1 is going to continue clearing buildings around the MacV compound. And he turns to Lieutenant Colonel Cheatham and he says, Ernie, I want you to clear the NVA out of New Hue. That's it. Like, that's the direction.
That's it. Okay.
Right. And,
I was expecting more. Yep.
Yeah. And Colonel Cheatham is he's leaning forward, like he's expecting more.
Mm-hmm.
And Colonel Hughes is like a U.S. Navy Cross winner from the Cape Cloudcaster in the campaign in the Second World War. So you may find this hard to believe, Brad, but sometimes U.S. Marine Corps personnel can be very blunt. Right?
No,
What?
Never heard that either.
No. Right? And so Cheatham's like, got it, sir. So anyway, he's on his way out when Hughes grabs him by the shoulder and he says to Big Ernie, he's like, look, Ernie, just try your best. If you have to use weapon systems in order to do it, then do it. And I'll provide top cover for you. Like I'll cover you if you have to use large weapon systems to destroy the enemy, because I know you're going into a tough fight. Right? So, all right. So here's Cheatham's scheme of maneuver. They're going to start at Hue University. He's going to have a hotel company right forward, Foxtrot company left forward, golf company in reserve. Hotel company has an easier go of it. They're actually able to get into the public health building rather easily. But as Foxtrot company is en route towards the Treasury and the post office, they start taking fire from a 51 caliber heavy machine gun at the Jeanne d'Arc Church and High School. So they some casualties there, and then they finally get down. But the Treasury building is very large, and the walls are very thick, and it's very hard to destroy the enemy within them. And so Foxtrot can't even get across the street and get into the Treasury building. And so hotel company actually has to withdraw back, otherwise they're going to be flanked. Meanwhile, Alpha 11 is sent down by Gravel to a police station to try to save those folks there. But the evening direction, right now, the Marines have been telling people in the chain of command, hey, look, small arms is not going to cut it. If you want us to close with and destroy the enemy and clear the enemy out of the city, we're going to need, heavy weapon systems and weapons platforms. And so the ROE restrictions on this evening are actually lifted. Okay. And then Gravel turns to, Hughes turns to Gravel and says, Marcus, I want 1-1 to be 2-5's left flank protection. Because Big Ernie Cheatham's not going to be able to clear the enemy out of Hue all by himself with his 1 battalion. So now you're going to have 2-5 right forward and 1-1 left forward as they move southwest through Hue.
Okay.
So now that the restrictions are lifted, the Marines can use mortars, anti-tank rockets, CS gas, recoilless rifles. They can use the M50 Ontos and the M48 tanks, right? And what they're going to have to learn is you have to fight these vehicles forward with a symbiotic relation protection, right? The dismounted infantry protecting the tanks and the tanks protecting the dismounted infantry. What I really like, though, is the M50 Ontos. So, Brad, a little over a year ago, I was down in Quantico, Virginia at the U.S. Marine Corps Museum. I was there for an ABCANS conference, but the U.S. Marine Corps Museum is in Quantico, and so I was able to visit the museum, and it's a fantastic museum, by the way. And this is their Hue display, and that's the M50 Ontos. It's a very small tracked vehicle. It has a crew of 2 personnel. There's a driver, and then there's a loader gunner. And because it's a tracked vehicle, it can negotiate the rubble fairly easily, small piles of rubble fairly easily, and it's very quick, and it's very swift. And it's only got 2 personnel. And it's got 6 106 millimeter recoilless rifles on it, so a lot of firepower. Yeah. The disadvantage is that the loader/gunner is on the outside of the vehicle when he has to load those recoilless rifles. But, so there's pros and cons to it, right? Yeah, pros and cons to it. But what's going to happen is the Ontos and the tankers are going to work together to protect each other, as well as the dismounted Marines. They're all going to have this symbiotic relationship protection as they're fighting through New Hue. So that's the advantages of bringing in all these weapons platforms and weapons systems. So it's good. So the 4th of February now, let's talk about 1st Battalion first. So Gravel and Alpha 1-1, because of the fire, the NVA are inside the Jeanne d'Arc Church and High School. 1-1's got to attack it. And so they can't get in through the doors or windows because the NVA and the VC are covering them. So they actually plant explosives on the outside of the buildings and then make mouse holes. And then when they get inside, they plant more explosives on the walls to make mouse holes. And right now, Brad, I'm assuming Norma Graham is typing away saying that Canadians were mouse holing at Ortona.
No, nothing from Norma in a while. Maybe she had to run, but I haven't seen her in a minute.
So they're starting a mouse hole they're starting a mouse hole, and they get to the church. And Colonel Gravel's like, he doesn't want to destroy a church because it's a church, right? Yeah. But the NVA and the VC are in the upper eaves of the building, and so he's got to call in the tanks, and he's got to call in the anti-tank rocket launchers, and he's got to fight through the church, and he causes a lot of damage. And they find 2 priests, 1 French and 1 Belgian priest, who are absolutely livid that their church was fought in. But hey, the bad guys were there, right? And so they had to fight through them. Okay, let's talk about Sergeant Alfredo Gonzalez wins the Medal of Honor here. Over 3 days, the 31st of January, the 3rd of February, and the 4th of February. Sergeant Gonzalez is running around like a madman, putting fire down on the enemy and saving casualties and saving lives. And unfortunately, he's mortally wounded on this day when they're fighting for the Jeanne d'Arc Church and High School. And so he's given the Congressional Medal of Honor posthumously. Okay, 2-5. Colonel Cheatham changes his scheme of maneuver a bit. He's got H Company still right forward and Foxtrot Company still left forward, but instead of Golf Company being in reserve, he actually moves Golf Company up to put support by fire positions for Hotel Company. Because the problem is Hotel Company approaches the public health building again, but there's a 51 caliber heavy machine gun at Les Loy Elementary School on Les Loy Street. And it's giving Hotel Company a lot of challenges. They start throwing smoke grenades out onto the street, but as soon as the smoke starts to billow out, the NVA start firing through the smoke, right? So it doesn't do any good whatsoever, right? I mean, usually when you throw enough smoke in the street, the smoke billows up and, the enemy stops firing because they don't want to, miss with their bullets, right? Yeah. But in this case, the NVA don't care. They're like, smoke, I bet you there's Marines behind it. So they start firing. They start firing through the smoke anyway. So what happens? Can you see that video there?
Yep.
Okay,
Okay.
so what happens is Big Ernie brings up an M274 Mule, which is ruggedized ATV, and it's got a 106 millimeter recoilless rifle on it, right? And so Big Ernie. Now, what you don't see that these two U.S. Marines are calmly loading the weapon, and there's bullets actually all around them.
Oh yeah.
There's Colonel Cheatham giving direction to those two U.S. Marines. That's Lieutenant General Christmas right there. But so these two U.S. Marines are just doing their thing. Colonel Cheatham, who's that gentleman right there, he's actually at one point, there's the round going down range. Jeez. At one point, he's actually going to creep up to that NVA 51 caliber machine gun position, put tracer rounds on it, so that the recoilless rifle team can fire the round on target. Right, that destroys the round. But what also happens is that when the recoilless rifle fires, it kicks up so much concrete dust that the whole street is now camouflaged with concrete dust. And so now the Marines can get across. So at this point, the Marines are like, don't use smoke grenades. Always use the recoilless rifle because it destroys the enemy and it kicks up enough concrete dust that the Marines can now get across the street and they're well covered. And the other thing they realize too, don't fire at the windows and doors, fire beside the windows and doors. Because, okay, if the enemy's in the windows and doors, yeah, sure, you fire. But if they're not in the windows and doors, the rounds just go through the windows and doors and the other side of the room, and that's useless. So fire beside the windows and doors because the enemy's probably standing on the other side of those, right? So there's another tactic that they learn. All right. So F Company is still having problems getting into the Treasury. That's the Treasury in the bottom right corner. And the post office is right behind it. Major John Savaldi is the second in command of 2-5. And he remembers that back in the MacV compound, he saw some E8 gas grenade launchers. So he runs back, grabs those gas grenade launchers. They launch like dozens of rounds of tear gas grenades. And what they do is they launch those tear gas grenades into the Treasury building, and then they attack the Treasury building. Well, of course, the NVA and the VC don't have gas masks. Yep. So they're coughing and hacking and puking, and they're completely rendered useless because of the tear gas that's inside the buildings. Yep. The Marines have their gas masks on, so they get into the building and they're able to clear the building fairly quickly because the tear gas is completely incapacitated the North Vietnamese Army soldiers and the Viet Cong guerrillas. All right, back in the Citadel, General Truong got some breathing space. He pushes out a battalion to start working its way down the northwest corner of the wall, and he also pushes out a battalion minus to start working its way down the southeast corner. 2nd and 7th Battalions of the Airborne Regiment, again, they're still at the Taylock Airfield, there. All right. Finally, the Army gets involved. Now, remember, it's the Tet Offensive. There's attacks going on all over the country. Everybody's spread really thin. But finally, the U.S. Army is able to scrape up a battalion. And it takes a day or two for them to do battle procedure. And then they get dropped off northwest of Waves. The 2nd Battalion of the 12th Cavalry of the 3rd Brigade of the 1st Cavalry Division, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Richard Sweet. So Colonel Sweet is dropped off at Tonke Chu, the village of Tonke Chu, just northwest. And he has very difficult fighting because it's only a battalion going up against, at least another battalion and even probably more than that of the 5th NVA Regiment. So he gets involved in a number of firefights on the 3rd and 4th, and he incurs casualties. So at this point, Colonel Sweet could have said, you know what? I'm only a battalion. I don't have enough resources to be able to defeat the NVA in this area, but he decides no, he's got a job to do. And he understands that as long as the 5th NVA holds this area freely, they'll be able to reinforce and resupply Old Hue rather easily. So what he does is he infiltrates his battalion through the enemy defensive positions that evening, the evening of the 3rd, the evening of the 4th of February, and he gets to the Non Hill. And I'll tell you why he wants to do that, Brad. I'm going to zoom out again, and I'm going to go to the F4 mapping program. And I'm going to put the ground elevations on because it gives it a bit more of a pop that way. I'm going to zoom out. And I'm going to come around, flatten this a bit. So there we go. So now I'm going to work my way west. And can you see that high ground there, Brad?
Yep, definitely can.
Right in front there? All the high ground right here where my arrow is.
Yep.
That's the non. So I'm going to go around to the west side of it now. Yeah, okay. And I'm going to sit myself right on top of the non right now. And when I do that, you can see that there's the Citadel off in the distance right there, right?
Yep.
And there's Highway 1. This is where the 5th NVA Regiment is. Well, if Colonel Sweet sits his battalion on the non right here, look at the beautiful view he's got. So he can now, those hydro towers didn't exist back then.
Yes.
But he's got this beautiful view, and now he can call in artillery fire. And if the cloud cover ever breaks, he can call in close air support to strike at the 5th NVA units that are resupplying and reinforcing the 6th NVA inside the Citadel here, right? So that's why he moves to this high ground. And with his battalion up on the high ground now, he can see anybody that's going to attack him, and he can call in artillery fire on anything that's trying to move into the Citadel itself, which, well done on his part, that he wants to, he understands his mission, that he has to disrupt the 5th NVA Regiment. So he's going to park himself in the non in order to be able to do it. All right, and he'll win a Distinguished Service Cross for his efforts here northwest of Hue, as you can see. All right, remember, Brad, the NVA and the VC destroyed the Baco Bridge on the 1st of February?
Yep.
On the evening of the 4th of February, 1940 hours, they destroyed the Ankou Bridge across the Fouquet Canal, which means now that if you're going to get bullets and beans and gasoline up to New Hue or the Citadel, it's got to be all done by air, which is hard because of the cloud cover, or it's got to be done by water. Or you got to fix that bridge and have bridging assets, right? And so now the NVA and the VC have made it even harder now, because amateurs talk tactics and professionals talk logistics. They've made it harder now for the Americans and the South Vietnamese to support themselves inside of New Hue because they destroyed the Ankou Bridge. All right, 5th of February. Changes scheme and maneuver for Colonel Cheatham. He's got Golf 25 right forward this time. They're going to go down Lloyd Street, and they're going to take the Circle Sportif nightclub. Hotel Company and Foxtrot Company are going to fight their way forward. Here's the problem. 1st Battalion, 1st Marines is still stuck back by the Jeanne d'Arc Church and High School. Like, Gravel can't find his... Remember, Gravel's supposed to be Cheatham's left flank protection.
Yep.
And he's still way back here.
Yeah.
Right? So Colonel Cheatham has a fairly easy day. He's able to advance here with only sporadic resistance until he gets to the Circle Sportif. But he sees that there's a large NVA force inside the hospital complex, right? So his morning is fairly easy, but he realizes now, because Colonel Gravel's way back here and he can't move forward, he's got to attack the hospital complex to protect his left flank.
Yeah.
And so this is the fighting that goes on in the afternoon of the 5th of February at the hospital complex. Now, I usually don't read from the slide, but I will.
Sure.
Here, Brett. The fight for the hospital complex took the remainder of the day, was methodical and brutal. All 3 companies and their NVA adversaries employed severe, overwhelming, and continually escalating levels of violence throughout the remaining daylight hours. Casualty numbers added up methodically as small arms, machine guns, grenades, 3.5-inch rockets, and RPGs, mortars, artillery, M50 Ontos, and M48 tank fire were used in a room-to-room, building-to-building fight. At one point, Golf 25 had advanced ahead of Hotel 25, so Cheatham directed that Golf 25 turn left and attack the building to Hotel 25's front in order to turn the enemy's flank. Golf 25 would continue and endure a 90-minute firefight in the late afternoon in order to secure the main hospital building itself. Hotel 25's Captain Christmas ran a gauntlet of fire several times through openings and courtyards in order to direct and coordinate his fight, and finally stood exposed on the top of an M48 tank to direct fire into several NVA positions. By nightfall, 25 had taken most of the hospital complex's buildings. And for that, Captain Christmas wins a Navy Cross. Like, wow, just the level of violence is overwhelming.
I was going to say that deserves that Navy Cross for sure.
Yeah. So 2nd and 7th Battalions able to secure the Anwa Gate, which is great because then the NVA can't use it to resupply and reinforce. But everybody else is pretty much still locked in position. The 4th Battalion of the 3rd Armored Regiment, remember, it was kind of pinned down here east of Hue. It's brought around by water, and it attacks the Tong-Tu Gate 7 times.
7, jeez.
The battalion goes across this bridge and tries to attack this gate 7 times, and all the attacks fail. So after that, they have to move down here and co-locate with the 2nd and 3rd Battalions of the 3rd Armored Regiment. There's no getting through the Tong-Tu Gate there. Okay, so 212's up on the Non, and it's clear that 1 battalion's not going to cut it. Yeah, that's great that Colonel Sweet's calling in artillery, but that doesn't mean that the enemy can't move things in at night. Yeah. So at this point, the U.S. Army realizes they've got to scrape up other battalions to join 212 for the fight northwest of the city. So that's the decision point made here. All right, 1-1 is There's an early morning defense as the NVA and the VC continue to try to take back the Jeanne d'Arc buildings, because again, it's right across the street from MacV. And so they want to, take those buildings, but they're able to defeat those attacks. And then Colonel Gravel is actually able to start moving southwest. Enemy mortar barrage at 1200, but then he's finally he links up with 2-5 finally at 1345. Big Ernie's got a big appetite today there, Brad. He wants to take the remainder of the hospital complex. He wants to seize the provincial headquarters, and he wants to clear the prison. The provincial headquarters is the headquarters of the 4th NVA Regiment, so he wants to destroy it. And there's also a Viet Cong flag that's flying outside of the headquarters that he's really hungry to take down. So the NVA actually started things off at 0425 hours by firing rockets at Gulf 2-5, but the company suffered only one minor casualty. At 700 hours, 2-5's three companies began their attacks, and the day turned into a repeat of the previous day's fighting as they fought for the remaining buildings in the hospital complex. Americans advancing, small NVA positions opening fire, the Marines initially taking casualties, while also responding with overwhelming violence from all of the different weapon systems and tear gas. The NVA soldiers withdrawing or remaining in place to be killed. M48 tanks continued to receive small arms and RPG rounds while firing 90mm rounds into enemy building positions. M50 Ontos vehicles jostled back and forth to fire the recordless rifles. Golf 2-5 and Hotel 2-5 appeared to fare better than Foxtrot 2-5, and at one point it was forced to withdraw and when faced with heavy enemy fire. Mortars and 40 105mm howitzer artillery shells, one of the few times the latter was used in this urban fight up to this point, were called in to soften the enemy positions. Foxtrot 2-5 2nd Platoon headquarters practically destroyed when they were caught in an open alley between multiple NVA positions firing from the prison's walls. By the early afternoon, the hospital complex in its entirety had finally been taken. Cheatham then tasked Golf 2-5 with the prison and H-25 the provincial headquarters. So H-25 up in the right, Golf and Foxtrot 2-5 making their way down to the prison. You can see the size of that provincial headquarters there, Brad. It's fairly sizable, right?
Yes.
All right. It takes 5 hours for Hotel Company because they have to go down a narrow street. It takes about 5 hours of them advancing and then putting enough firepower into that building, because it's a sizable building, before they can actually attack it. 5 hours of prep work just to break into and gain lodgement into that building. Now, great video here. Can you see that video there, Brad, and bring it up on the screen? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So there's actually a CBS crew that's co-located with Hotel 2-5 when they attack the provincial building. There's Captain Christmas, Ron Christmas, talking on the radio. A grenade has just gone off, but he's not flinching. And this is Hotel 2-5 now attacking that complex. They do suffer some wounded as a result. And here's the flag that they're so desperate to take down from the front of the provincial headquarters building itself. And I don't know what it is. I think it's some sort of personal Marine Corps policy that, every Marine has to have a U.S. flag in their uniform, because there's always pictures of them. Yeah, I think it started with Iwo Jima. Ever since Iwo Jima, they've got to have an American flag somewhere in the unit so that they can always raise the American flag. Now, the funny thing is that later on, Colonel Cheatham is told that he has to take this American flag down and put up a South Vietnamese government flag. Yeah. Right. And Colonel Cheatham is like, you can come down and take down the flag yourself if you want, but that American flag is staying up. Right. And that was the Marines with the Viet Cong flag there. Can you hear that as well, Brad?
No, you have it muted. No, it doesn't come through usually.
It doesn't come through. Okay. So
unfortunately,
it doesn't come through. No worries. So here's the Marines finding North Vietnamese Army soldiers and Viet Cong guerrillas in spider holes in and around the provincial headquarters. Some of these enemy soldiers are dead, and some of them are not. Yeah. But they get dragged out pretty much and taken prisoner. Right. So here they are doing their thing. Okay. Cool.
Were they digging those prior to the attack, or do we even know? Just
we think the NVA and the VC dug them as part of their hasty defensive preparations. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
So they're at Golf 2-5, F-25, Foxtrot 2-5. It's only 3 hours of firepower going into the building, but they also launched CS gas grenades into it, and they break in and gain lodgement at 14:05. Well, they start H-hour at 14:05. They actually break in and gain lodgement at 14:15 hours, and they're able to get into the top floor first and fight top down. but the CS gas has completely incapacitated the NVA and the VC. So fortunately their fight inside the prison takes a lot less time because of the use of CS gas.
Right.
And Colonel Cheatham, because of these 3 days of his leadership, Colonel Cheatham will win the Navy Cross for these 3 days in particular that he's been in charge of 2-5. Okay, 4th Battalion, 2nd Armored Regiment's close to Chante Gate. Brad, you can't write a Hollywood script better than this. So the NVA attacked through the Chante Gate, but the 4th Battalion's able to beat them off. The NVA remember I was saying how the walls are so tall that it's very hard to negotiate?
Yeah.
Sure enough, these NVA soldiers have ropes with grappling hooks. They throw them over the walls. They climb up the walls and they attack the 4th, but they climb down the other side of the wall. And they attack the 4th Battalion that way. And they actually punt the 4th Battalion back to the Tayloke airfield.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, so the walls are negotiable, but it takes a lot of courage in order to do it. And the NVA are able to do it here. And they completely surprised the 4th Battalion by doing it.
It's like a medieval movie or something.
Yeah, exactly. So here's Brigadier General Tourong's challenges now. Remember, he doesn't have the same weapon systems and weapons platforms that the Americans do, right? Yeah. So he's only got troops with small arms, really. And so his battalions are 2 company strength, exhausted, a lack of ammunition, food, and water. Why? Because there's so much cloud cover, they can't bring it in by air. Yeah. And, of course, the NVA are shooting at any watercraft on the Perfume River, and they're destroying the bridges, so you can't get them across the bridges. There's a lot of poor weather and a lot of morale. General Tourong tells he's going to assume some risk here, and he's going to pull these 3 battalions, the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th Battalion for 3rd Armored Regiment. He's going to put them watercraft, and he's going to bring up to the main caw because he needs them inside the Citadel. They can't just sit out here now and keep these NVA pinned in place because he needs them inside the Citadel to fight. 7th of February at 5:30, the NVA and the VC destroy the Nguyen Huang Bridge. They've destroyed 3 bridges now, and now everything's either got to be brought in by air or over the water. Now there's no way to attack the Citadel from land. It's got to be all done by water or air because now they've destroyed the Nguyen Huang Bridge. All right, 7th of February, when Hotel Company destroyed the 4th NVA Regiment headquarters at the provincial headquarters, that pretty much took the steam out of the NVA and the VC in New Hue. And so they only, so 2-5 and 1-1, they meet sporadic resistance as they move southwest through New Hue. Golf 2-5 does find some resistance at the camp south of the prison. Hotel 2-5 suffers some casualties from mortars, and Bravo 1-1, the company commander is killed, and they do lose an M50 crew. So I'm not suggesting that, it was all rainbows and pots of gold. This is very tough fighting, and the Marines are losing. They're gaining casualties, right? Because it's tough fighting to the determination of the enemy. Okay. So 5th Battalion, 7th Cavalry, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Vout, is now thrown into the fight. But he faces the same challenges that 212 had when they were initially came in. He's fighting a number of units, trying to fight his way down to 212. And the helicopter crews are, when the cloud cover allows it, the helicopter crews are being very daring, and they're trying to bring in ammunition and food and water and take out the casualties. But a number of helicopter crews get shot down. 3 helicopter crews get shot down, and 5-7 has to continue to divert to go and get to save the helicopter crews.
Yeah, well, they can't be, how high off the deck are they? It can't be very high.
Exactly, because of the cloud cover, right? So yeah. All right, 8th of February, the NVA and the VC launch a rocket barrage at Mac V. So an early morning wake-up call. Alpha 1-1 is working its way back now to the Jeanne d'Arc buildings, where there's still some NVA positions holding out. Bravo 1-1 goes down to the police station. They find 2.5 tons of rifles and ammunition that are unused. That could have been used by the NVA and the VC, but they weren't found. Foxtrot and Hotel 2-5 do relief in place. So Golf 2-5 goes to the U.S. Consul General's residence to save those Americans. And F-25 and Hotel H-25 go to the military camp, where they find an ARVN weapons cache and an AFV cache. So they stumble upon 1,500 rifles, all the ammunition for it, 130 caliber medium machine guns, 4 57 millimeter recoilless rifles, 15 M113 armored personnel carriers, and 8 M41 tanks that the NVA and the VC didn't use. They could have used it. That would have been one hell of a fight.
Wow.
But thankfully, the NVA and the VC didn't use them, so that's good. Now, the Americans are realizing that the NVA and the VC may reinforce across the Phu Cam Canal, so now they're going to start destroying bridges. So the tanks and the recoilless rifles and the dismounted Marines have to put fire across the Phu Cam Canal so the engineers can run forward put demolitions, and they destroy that bridge to prevent any reinforcements from coming across. All right, inside the Citadel, the 4th Battalion of the 3rd Arvin and the 3rd Battalion of the 3rd Arvin are brought into the fight now, and they're creeping their way down to the southwestern wall, but the NVA are dug in against that wall really deeply. So that's the fight that goes on this day. 5-7 now, it attacks the NVA strong point at Tonke-Chu, the small village right here. So it still can't get down. There's just too many forces in between the two battalions. And so they can't get down and link up. So the U.S. Army realizes it needs to scrape up more battalions from someplace. Remember, the Tet Offensive is still going on, right? So they're still fighting all over the country. And so the U.S. Army realizes it's got to scrape up more battalions from someplace to throw them into the fight northwest of Hue. On the 9th of February, the day before was rockets. Today, it's mortars. Mortars drop on the MacV compound early in the morning. Colonel Gravel's got 1-1 fighting around the Tudo Stadium. They actually lose a tank. The tank receives 7 57 millimeter recoilless rifle rounds, and the 7th round is what destroys the tank. Golf 2-5 finds 600 tons of rice in a cache. It finds some very scared civilians, and they try to work it, and they try to push the enemy out of the cane field. What's happened is that because the 804th Battalion of the 4th NVA Regiment has been sitting in the northeast of the city, they haven't been touched. Right. So now 1-1 is finding that even though they worked their way, 1-1 and 2-5 worked their way southwest, now they're coming back and they're running into, fresh forces in the northeast part of the city. And when they're doing that, they run into an Arvin major. He's been trapped in his house since the 31st of January, and literally beside his house, he knows that the battalion command post for the NVA 804th Battalion is right beside his house. So he tells the Americans, and they decide to call in an artillery mission. It takes a majority of the morning and the afternoon to get the authority and to pull 1-1 out of the area. But they drop 250 howitzer rounds, 155 millimeter rounds, and a good dose of 81 millimeter rounds on the CP in order to destroy it. And the engineers try to destroy another bridge down across the Fouquet Canal, but the NVA and the VC are onto them, and they're putting a lot of fire down range.
Right.
And even though the tanks and the Ontos and the Corliss rifles are putting fire across the Fouquet, they're not having any effect. And so they call in artillery to destroy the bridge.
Okay.
To prevent NVA and VC reinforcements from coming across. All right, 212 is told, okay, get down off the non and work your way up to 5-7 instead. If 5-7 can't come to you, go up to 5-7. We'll do a hammer and anvil thing where 212 will be the hammer and 5-7 will be the anvil. Colonel Sweet fights his forces forward. There's way too many forces there. He has to turn around and withdraw back to the non, unfortunately. So, and they're still saying we need more units. These courses of action are not working. We need more units. All right. Here's the sit rep. Now, the 2nd and 7th Battalions of the Airborne Regiment are going to be pulled out because they're going to be used as a strategic reserve, and the Arvin Marines are going to come in to take their place. General Tourong is very frustrated. Like you can see, his units have only cleared the north half of the Citadel, and he's somewhat embarrassed that his troops have only done that. And again, but they don't have the weapon systems and weapon platforms the Americans do, right? And so he asked for support from the Americans, and so General Hue turns to Colonel Bone, 5th Marines, who turns to Major Bob Thompson, the 1st Battalion, and he says, Bob, you're going to have to take 1-5 up to the Citadel, and you're going to fall under General Toulon, and you're going to help him clear the Citadel. All right. So you said you couldn't hear the volume, right?
The sound won't come through for some reason on this software.
That's too bad.
It used to, but not anymore, unfortunately. Yeah,
Okay.
I remember these interviews. Yeah.
All right. So here's Captain Ron Christmas, company commander for H25, and I would play the video. But what he says in this video is, on the 13th of February, he was actually wounded in action by enemy mortars, and they put him on an M274 Mule, and he recalls that the mortars are still dropping in, and his signaler and his sergeant major, or his gunnery sergeant, jump on top of him and try to protect him from the mortars. And, they're basically trying to prevent their company commander from being further wounded, right? And it's a really powerful moment because, here's two of his subordinates, jumping on him to protect him from the mortar rounds.
Okay. Yeah. So
as he already lays wounded, right?
Sorry,
so
when we're finished, if you could send me the link, I'll pop it in the description. So
okay, cool. Thank you.
Be able to watch it afterwards, or when they're watching it later.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much.
While we're watching it here. Yep.
Yeah, but it's a pretty powerful moment because it demonstrates that you must be doing something right when your subordinates are willing to risk their lives to protect you, right? So it's pretty powerful. Okay, so the 10th to the 22th of February, 25 and 11 are pretty much just going to mop up any stragglers. Right. They're going to repair the bridges across the Phu Cam, and they're going to help Vietnamese civilians out of the city so that they can be, so they don't fall victim to the violence. And then you can see the casualty numbers there in the bottom right corner.
Yeah.
All right. Here's the 10th to the 12th of February is the planning and movement days. So this is Brigadier General Truong's plan to clear the Citadel. Battle Group Alpha, the South Vietnam Marine Corps, is going to do a 4-passage lines through the 3rd Arvin Regiment, and then they're going to clear all the way to the southern tip of the Citadel. Meanwhile, Bob Thompson's 1st Battalion, 5th Marines is going to start at the main Cail, and it's going to clear down to the southeastern side.
Right.
He won't have his entire company. He's got to detach Delta Company and give it to Colonel Cheatham to help in the mopping up of stragglers down in New Hue. But there's some Battle Group Alpha has a real tough time getting to the main Cail. Like, they're taking helicopters. They have to fly low because the cloud cover. They're getting shot at. The watercraft they're taking are getting shot at. Bob Thompson's 1-5 has a bit of an easier go, but what happens is they get brought in pieces to no, I'll go back to the F1 map. So here we go. So Bob Thompson's battalion is down at Phu Loc, located right here. Sorry, I'll take the ground elevations off. There we go. So Bob Thompson's battalion is down here at Phu Loc, and he's told that he's got to go up to Hue here. So Alpha Company leaves first, and it gets all the way to the Citadel, and then Bravo Company leaves in the afternoon, and it gets to the Citadel. The next day, Bob Thompson's helicoptered to the airport, to the airbase at Phu Bai. He receives some general orders about what he's got to do when he gets to the Citadel. He's then transported up to New Hue. He goes to the MACV compound. From there, he's given more specific orders from Colonel Hughes. Okay, you're going to go work for General Truong inside the Citadel and clear the southeast corner. And then he goes up. He takes his Charlie and Delta companies up to Dak Lo Park and the Hue University, and he basically waits there. Okay, so and meanwhile, Alpha and Bravo companies are already in the main Cail. All right, and then later that evening, Bob Thompson, his battalion headquarters, and Charlie Company are able to make it up to the main Cail for the day of fighting on the 13th. And remember, Delta Company is still with 2-5, clearing out stragglers down in by the Phu Cam Canal. So 1-5 leaves the main Cail. It's working its way southeast, and as they're working their way down, they have to do a relief in place with the Arvin airborne troops, right? And so they're making their way down, and you can see Alpha Company's left forward, Charlie Company's right forward, battalion headquarters, and Bravo Company's in reserve. And as they're making their way down, the Arvin airborne troops are walking past the Americans, and they're having cigarettes and smiling and laughing, right? And this is rather odd. Like, this is the unit that we're supposed to do the relief in place with, and they're leaving their positions already. Like, we haven't got down to where we're supposed to get to yet. So what happened was the Arvin Airborne Regiment was like, oh, the Marines are coming? All right, we're out of here. So they got up and they left, right? So now the North Vietnamese Army and the Viet Cong look and they see the Arvin soldiers withdrawing, and so they move up to their positions. And so when Alpha Company moves up close to the Dong Ba Tower, the world explodes, and suddenly Alpha Company's taking fire from the wall, from the Dong Ba Tower, and from the buildings to their immediate front. And within 15 minutes, they have 35 casualties, including the company commander. Jeez. Right. So Thompson now has to pull Alpha Company out of the front lines, and he has to have Bravo Company go up and conduct a relief in place. And that takes a majority of the morning because of the amount of fire that's coming down. But once that's done by the early afternoon, now you see Bravo Company's left forward. Charlie Company now moves forward, and it runs into the same violence that was perpetuated against Alpha Company earlier that day, where they start taking fire from all sides. And so Bravo Company has to fight its way forward for a couple of hours in order to flank the NVA so that they withdraw back from the front of Charlie Company. Mm-hmm. And finally, at 14:55, Colonel Hughes tells Bob Thompson to stop the advance, and he asks Thompson for an assessment. Thompson immediately says, I need close air support, I need naval, and I need artillery fire, and I need Delta Company back, because I'm not going to be able to fight this fight without my full battalion.
Yeah.
So this is what happens the next day, 14th of February. H hour begins at 0800 hours, but again, with only 2 companies forward, and how determined the defenders are, and because the Dongba Tower is very well manned, they can't go anywhere. And so Thompson decides he gets one of the rare days when he's able to call in close air support and artillery, but there's 5 challenges. First, it takes authority to get close air support and artillery. Second, he's got to withdraw his troops back, and so that they don't have friendly fire casualties. Third, it takes time for the naval craft to move into place so that they can launch the 5 and 8 inch shells. When they do launch the 5 and 8 inch shells, those shells either slam into the citadel walls, or they fall, or they go beyond the NVA's defensive positions and fall past the positions. And when the NVA and the VC see that 5th Battalion or 1st Battalion is withdrawing back, they go up and move forward so that the rounds land behind them. Right. So those are the 5 challenges that they face. Delta 1-5 is now en route, and they're going to pop out again there, Brad, to use the F4 map. So, Captain Myron Harrington is the Delta 1-5 company commander, and his units are the Docklaw Park. They go to board the watercraft, the U.S. Navy watercraft, but it's crammed full of bullets and beans and gasoline, right? Everything you need to fight a battle, right? Like every square inch of that. So Myron Harrington, his company headquarters, and a squad of Marines are able to squeeze themselves onto the boat. Because remember, the bridge has been taken out and you can't use air support, right? So the watercraft start moving their way up across the Perfume and up this waterway. Well, here's the Dongba Tower right there. And as you can see, Brad, that waterway is not too far away from the Dongba Tower. So they start taking fire. The Navy craft start taking fire, but they're able to actually get past and go all the way up to the main Cail and drop Myron Harrington off. But now the watercraft have to come back down the river.
Yeah.
Right. And of course, when you start doing the same thing over and over again, the enemy starts. So they start taking fire as they pass by the Dongba. And then they get back to Docklaw Park, where they can load up the rest of Delta Company. So they load up the rest of Delta Company, who starts making their way up the river. Well, this time the Marines are prepared because they know that they're going to take fire from the tower. Yeah. So they got 1st Battalion, 11th Marines. They've got their mortars at Docklaw Park. So what they start doing is they start firing all kinds of explosive and tear gas bombs at the Dongba Tower right here. And so all these explosive and tear gas mortar bombs are falling around the Dongba Tower. But what happens, Brad? The prevailing winds that day are blowing to the east. Yep. And so what happens is so much CS gas is falling on the Dongba Tower that these invisible clouds of CS gas are now working their way eastwards, just as the U.S. Navy craft are passing the Dongba. And so all of the U.S. Navy sailors and the U.S. Marines on the boats are now coughing and hacking and puking. And it's just because there's this huge volume of CS gas that's now swamping their boats from the rounds that have landed on the Dongba Tower. So the U.S. Navy sailors turn the boats around, and they're like, to hell with this, and they drive back to the Docklaw Park. Now, so Bob Thompson's still up here without Delta Company, and he gets on the radio with Colonel Hughes and says, I need Delta Company, please. And so that night, the U.S. Navy and they also use some sampans to pull the boats. They use boats to pull the sampans. They load up, they go up the river. They're actually able to drive by the Dongba Tower and get up to the main Cail. And then D Company is actually able to come down and link up with 1-5 down by the Dongba. The problem is that it's nighttime, and Myron Harrington cannot do a reconnaissance of the ground that he's going to fight on tomorrow, which is problematic, right? Like ideally, you want to do a reconnaissance of the ground that you're going to fight on, right? But you can't do that because it's nighttime by the time the entire company gets there. All right, 14th of Feb. Remember, the Arvin, Priestley screwed over 1st Battalion, 5th Marines by withdrawing from their positions, right? They did the same thing to Battle Group Alpha. 1st and 5th Battalions, Battle Group Alpha, go to occupy their positions, and the Airborne have left, and the NVA have crept into their place. And so now they have to try to fight their way towards the 3rd Arvin Regiment. And meanwhile, the NVA attacked the 3rd Arvin Regiment, and they actually pin a battalion in place, and they start whittling down the battalion with a number of casualties. Next day, 15th of February. So here's Thompson's scheme maneuver. He's got Delta Company left forward. They only have 2 platoons because one of the platoons has been pulled off for escort duty. He's got Bravo Company center, and he's got Charlie Company right forward with Alpha Company in reserve. Thompson drops in the close air support and the artillery support, which is great. Bravo 1-5 and Charlie 1-5 start advancing, no challenges, but Delta 1-5 runs into a hornet's nest at the Dong Ba.
Oh, yeah, right.
More rockets, mortars, an M48 tank, and a pair of M50 Ontos finally arrived in order to overwhelm the enemy positions in and above the wall and the tower. And at 1400 hours, Harrington ordered a squad to climb the wall to see if they could work their way through the structures on top of it in order to close in on the tower. The M48 tank would frequently move out from behind cover, its commander firing the cupola-mounted 50 caliber machine gun at enemy RPG teams, while the gunner fired 90 millimeter ammunition into the wall and tower, all the while being directed by Harrington through a radio. At 1600 hours, Delta 1-5 edged its way closer to the tower, and at 1630 hours, Harrington launched a final assault with 60 millimeter mortar rounds, hammering the tower itself. In a matter of minutes, it was finally captured. And these photos from Dr. Villard, look at the Dong Ba now. Like, look at it now. Brad is completely pulverized.
Doesn't look like a building anymore.
No. Here's the afternoon. Bravo 1-5 and Charlie 1-5 now have challenges because what's happening is Charlie 1-5 is receiving fire from NVA positioned inside the Imperial Palace. They're on top of the Imperial Palace walls, and they're firing at Charlie 1-5. So the 3rd platoon that had been doing escort duty is brought down, and Bob Thompson throws it over to Charlie Company to see if they can put support by fire, firing positions on the enemy that's firing at Charlie Company. And because Charlie Company can't advance anymore, Bravo Company can't advance any further either because Bravo doesn't want to be flanked. All right. The Black Panthers, as well as Arvin Cavalry Troop and Battle Group Alpha's 1st, 5th Battalions, they're trying to attack the NVA that's surrounding the 3rd Arvin Regiment. The 4th Battalion is now en route, but this is all the fighting that's going to happen today. There's just the porous nature of the urban environment, right, where there's NVA, VC positions everywhere and all around.
Yeah.
2nd Battalion of the 501st finally joins this fight, and they start clearing out units northwest of the city. So U.S. Army is slowly making progress northwest of the city, which is good. 16th of February, same scheme of maneuver. Delta left forward, Bravo center, Charlie right forward. The NVA demonstrated their ability to act as early morning violent alarm clocks by bombarding the Dong Ba Gate Tower with both 82 millimeter, 60 millimeter mortar ammunition at 4:30 hours. This indirect fire was immediately followed by an attack with a small group of NVA soldiers using grenades and RPGs to cause casualties and evict the squad of Delta 1-5's Marines from the tower itself. Once this was done, the enemy soldiers reoccupied the tower and began firing at Delta 1-5's other positions. Harrington immediately ordered a counterattack to occur, and Marines began by lobbing grenades at the NVA, firing at them from above. This was followed by small arms, rockets, and M79 40-millimeter grenades, which either caused enemy casualties or forced the Ranger to withdraw, allowing Delta 1-5 to regain the tower by dawn. That's Captain Myron Harrington right there on the left of this photo. That's Captain Myron Harrington there, actually. And that's the Dong Ba Tower. I love these photos from Dr. Villard. Look at the Dong Ba Tower. It's just completely pulverized now. Like, there's so much munitions have gone into fighting for that piece of real estate. It's just completely destroyed now.
It's been said in the sidebar, but it's reminding me of, of Manila.
Yeah, very much so.
Destruction.
So the fighting this day is extremely difficult. Battalion only advanced 150 meters that day. But given the almost insurmountable challenges, it was a feat of arms just to make even this kind of progress. The amount of destruction caused by the now daily bombardments, combined with the rat's nests of fighting holes, pillboxes, bunkers, roadblocks, and mutually supporting positions that the NVA had created, along with their sheer determination to hold every position and continual counterattack if a position had been lost, were only a couple of challenges meeting the Americans. Advancing on top of the Citadel's wall in order to flank and fire down on NVA positions could not be done, because NVA soldiers in 4 or 5 stories buildings just outside the wall in Geohoy Island, that's that island off to the east, right here, to the east, dominated the area with observation of fire. The enemy positioned small arms and machine gun positions on top of the Imperial Palace walls also to look down on 1-5's advance. Buildings were made of thick-walled masonry jammed together with only occasional alleyways or narrow streets, and each room had to be cleared one by one with grenades and savage close quarter and sometimes hand-to-hand combat. Thompson's Marines were rarely relieved, slept in 3 to 4 hour snatches, grew numb with fatigue and sometimes despair. To counter all of these challenges, Thompson continued to employ naval and artillery indirect fire and close air support strikes. The dismounted Marines adapted the room clearing tactics ensured to protect the M48 tanks and the M50 Ontos, who in turn protected the infantry by wreaking havoc on NVA positions with large explosive or concrete piercing fused shells. 1st Battalion 11th Marines supported 1-5's advance by firing 4.2-inch high explosive and tear gas shells from the south bank of the Perfect River also. Like, just, are you kidding me? Like, that's just overwhelming violence. So battle here up in the northwest corner of Citadel now. Battle Group Alpha's 3 battalions, 1st, 4th, and 5th, still attacking the 3rd NVA Regiment, who actually withdraw through the Chantay Gate, and then they conduct a counterattack back to the Chantay Gate. But 1st Lieutenant Alexander Wells is an American artillery officer who is co-located with the ARVN units, and he calls in artillery fire on the Chantay Gate to break up the attack. And all they're hearing over the radio are the screams of North Vietnamese Army soldiers who are being caught in that artillery attack. So thankfully, Alex Wells was thinking quick here when he dropped that artillery on the Chantay Gate. 17th of February, NVA wake-up call, mortar barrage at 0430 hours. Again, Bob Thompson replies with close air support and naval support to begin their advance. But remember, they're sandwiched in between the Imperial Palace and the Citadel's walls, and they're taking fire from both sides, right? So they get, but by the time they finish the day, they're about halfway down the northeastern wall, but they're low on ammunition. Some soldiers didn't eat, some Marines didn't eat yesterday, and some Marines won't eat today because they've run out of rations. Okay, back up in the northwest corner. They're pretty much stalemated right now. And what happens is General Tourong, because he wants to help out 1-5, he orders a Black Panther company to go down and support 1-5 and to see if they can get into the Imperial Palace to stop the enemy from firing there. It's a sad day for 1-5. So Major Aloysius Paul McGonigal, he was actually the MACV compound chaplain. But when the battalion Padre for 1-5 couldn't join them for the battle, Paul McGonigal, or Aloysius McGonigal, asked Bob Thompson if he could join them. And there was only one caveat, is that every night, like Bob Thompson says, all right, you can go out and do your thing, go out and help the wounded and do last rites, all the good things the Padres do. But every night you've got to come back to my headquarters and report in, so I know you're alive, and to tell me how your day was. Yeah. And on the evening of the 17th, Major McGonigal doesn't show up. And the next day they found Major McGonigal, he'd been killed. Either a bullet or shrapnel had torn into his head. So it's a sad day for 1-5 because they lose their Padre. But he was doing what good chaplains do, right? He was running all over the battlefield, helping the wounded and giving last rites to the nearly dead and all that. So 18th of February is largely a planning and resupply day. Remember, the taking out of the bridges and the close cloud cover has really stymied the logistics, and everything's got to be brought over the water, right? So here's the planning. So now that Battle Group Alpha's been able to take the Chantay Gate, and they're co-located with 3rd ARVN Regiment, they're going to work their way now to the south tip of the Citadel. 1-5 still going to continue working its way southeast. And finally, 3rd Brigade's found the 1st Battalion of the 7th Cavalry to drop into the battle northwest of Hue. But you can see 1-5 still has a lot of resupply challenges and the poor weather and low personnel numbers. There's also restricted fire support because now they're too close to the NVA and the VC positions. And so now Bob Thompson's being told that he may not be able to have the close air support and the artillery and the naval support that he needs because they're very close. The Black Panther commander shows up, company commander shows up, and he says to Bob Thompson, I need you to help me to blow a wall. I want you to use your weapons platforms and systems, and we'll use some explosives, and we're going to blow a wall into the Imperial Palace walls, and I'm going to start clearing out the Imperial Palace. And Bob Thompson looks at him and goes, you're not doing that. That's a suicide mission. Like, you're not doing that at all. No, this is an order from Brigadier General Toulon. So Bob Thompson contacts General Toulon, and he says, sir, I get it, but you can't do that. It's a suicide mission. Like, that's just crazy. That's a crazy plan. And so General Turong rescinds the order. And so the Black Panther company commander is not going to go into the Imperial Palace and start clearing it out yet.
Good for him for being willing to do it, I suppose.
Yeah, I suppose. 2 tough days for 1-5. Okay, you can see all the challenges up in the left corner there, right? And because they're so close to the enemy and because they're out in extended line, it's very hard. They can't bring in any close air support or artillery strikes. And the NVA are still very determined. And staff officers are from Task Force X-Ray are like, tell 1-5 to move faster. Tell 1-5 to move faster. And Bob Thompson, he actually threatens to resign. He's actually like, you can come up here and try fighting this fight because it's, I have all these challenges I'm going through. So I'm trying the best that I can. General Abrams, the guy they named the tank after, he's now up here in I Corps, and he's actually taking command of all of I Corps to try to sort out all of this. And even General Abrams suggests that 1-5 should be relieved in place because it's not doing a good enough job. And Lieutenant General Cushman down at 3 MAF in Da Nang, he actually says to Colonel Hughes, I want you to fire Bob Thompson, and you're going to take over command of 1st Battalion and fight it through the rest of the Citadel. And, Brad, in the military, loyalty doesn't only go up the chain of command, it goes down the chain of command too, right? Mm-hmm. And Colonel Hughes says to Lieutenant General Cushman, I will resign first before I give that order. Bob Thompson is doing the best he can with the resources he has under very challenging conditions. So I will resign first before I give the order to fire Bob Thompson. So General Cushman backs off and Bob Thompson keeps his job and continues on with the fight. The good news is because Bob Thompson does need more resources, Colonel Bone has told the 3rd Battalion commander from 5th Marines that he has to give up a company to Robert Thompson. So Lima 3-5 is en route. That's commanded by Captain John Niotis.
Right.
And Thompson, one of his subordinates, comes forward with a daring plan for the evening of the 20th February. And the Alpha Company commander, First Lieutenant Patrick Polk, volunteers a 2nd platoon to conduct this daring plan. They've been fighting during the day, and because urban operations is so physically and mentally exhausting, they fight during the day and then they rest at night. Right? Fight during the day, rest at night. Fight during the day, rest at night. So what Thompson subordinate says, why don't we try to infiltrate up to the positions, the NVA positions at nighttime, because we've set this pattern now and they're probably expecting us not to do it. So why don't we try to infiltrate at least a platoon up to see if we can get up to those positions? So Thompson's like, let's try it. Let's try it and see what happens. Okay. 19th and 20th, really hard days for the ARVN inside the Citadel. You can see the NVA launched a 2-battalion attack there with a lot of indirect fire support, and the ARVN artillery has to counter with over 2,000 rounds. And there's very little forward movement. But look, they are starting to pinch the NVA down into the south part of the Citadel. And so now there's a lot of senior ranking North Vietnamese Army Viet Cong. They're like, we got to get out the Hue Gate in order to, survive and live to fight another day. All right. So 2nd Platoon from Alpha 1-5 does its infiltration up. And they're actually able to infiltrate up and occupy the positions that the North Vietnamese Army, the Viet Cong, were in the night before, which is really odd. Like, where did they go?
Right.
All right. And so the 2nd Platoon is looking out and they're looking down the street, and there's the NVA soldiers, cigarettes in hand, smoking, talking away, joking. They got their rifles on their shoulders, and they're working their way back up to the positions. So what's been happening every day, and remember, when you set a pattern and you're fighting against an enemy that is a living, thinking human being that reacts, when you set a pattern, the enemy is going to adjust to that pattern. Remember how Bob Thompson's been calling in close air support and naval artillery every morning? So what's happened is the NVA have gotten used to that. And so what they do is at nighttime, they wait for the Americans to stop. They look out, okay, the Americans have stopped. Now that the Americans have stopped, they wait till darkened hours, and then they withdraw back. So this way, when the close air support and the naval artillery fire falls down, it falls down in front of them, and it doesn't cause any casualties. And then once it stops, they can move back up and reoccupy their positions again. Well, this day, there was no close air support and naval artillery, but the NVA still followed the routine. So they withdrew back. They didn't know that 2nd Platoon had infiltrated up. So when these NVA started coming up now, 2nd Platoon opens up and kills all those NVA. And now the NVA are like, damn it, they're onto us. Yeah. Because they know now that we've been withdrawing every night. But the NVA's backs are literally to the wall. They're at the southeastern corner now of the Citadel, and they are very determined to stay in place. But by the end of the day, when 5 is within one block of the southeastern wall. And Lima 3-5 is able to link up that evening, which is great.
Yes, right.
Battle Group Alpha and 3rd ARVN has a real challenge. Now they face the same problem that 1-5 had, is that they're sandwiched in between the Imperial Palace walls and the Citadel walls. And the waterways are forcing them to be, canalized into killing zones. And what's happening is the NVA are actually dropping in 122 millimeter rockets from outside the walls onto their positions, right? So again, they're having a real tough day trying to fight forward here as the rockets continue to fall down on their positions. All right, Northwest, they got 3 battalions, U.S. Army battalions on the attack now. 1-7 is going to stay behind and do some mopping up operations, but now these 3 battalions and their intent is to get to Old Huey in order to stop the 5th NVA Regiment from reinforcing and resupplying and to clear them out. 22 February, between 3:30 and 1200 hours is a trading of mortar and rockets between the NVA and the Marine Corps, and there's pretty much a stalemate as a result because there's indirect fire falling all over the place. L35 does a relief in place of Bravo 1-5, and Thompson tells him to attack the Tuong 2 gate. And you know the saying there, Brad, that professionals are predictable, but amateurs are dangerous?
Yep.
L35 knows nothing about urban warfare tactics. So the commander just says, run forward and start firing. So they literally, with M48 tanks running right behind them, they just literally running forward and completely catches the NVA off guard because right now the NVA are used to these other tactics. Well, L35, they just run forward and start firing, right? And so they're actually able to gain some ground. Bob Thompson actually almost gets killed by one of the M48 tanks. His battalion headquarters is mistaken for an NVA outpost, and the round sails over, but they're able to stop the tank from firing, which is good.
Yikes.
And then finally, the ARVN Ranger battalions have cleared Geohoy Island.
Oh, right.
Which now means that they can get up on top of the walls and start clearing those positions up there, which is good. All right. Good news and bad news over on the western side. The 3rd ARVN Regiment's attacked by the NVA, but another battalion of the 3rd ARVN Regiment and the Black Panther Company is able to get into the Imperial Palace and start clearing out the north side of the Imperial Palace, which is good. But they're still running into a lot of stuff. And again, they don't have the same weapon systems and the weapons platforms that the Americans do, right? They just have small arms and grenades and maybe some anti-tank rocket launchers. That's it. All 4 battalions, Northwest City, they're on the move, and they're starting to close with and destroy elements of the 5th NVA Regiment. So you can see they're making their way. And the significance of this now is that inside Old Huey, there's very senior NVA and Viet Cong leaders who are like, now we have to withdraw from the city sooner than later, because if not, we're going to be trapped in here. We're going to die. So that's the significance of that. All right. H hour on the 23rd, 1-5 reaches the southeastern wall. They're going to complete their mission this day. L35 is a little smarter on urban operations tactics now, and they use the M48s and the M50s in support, although they do lose 2 tanks, and they're actually able to take the Tuong 2 gate. And Delta 15's Myron Harrington, fantastic leadership here. He's using close air support, mortar fire to allow his Marines to sneak up to these fortified defensive positions. At one point, Harrington is about 25 meters away from where the artillery and the close air support is landing.
Oh, wow.
And he's literally leading from the front. And then he's got the tanks firing his dismounted Marines into the objective. And then Myron Harrington is literally leading his Marines in as they attack these defensive strong points, and they're able to destroy these defensive strong points. And so Harrington wins the Navy Cross for his leadership here. But can you imagine being 25 meters away from close air support and artillery?
No, I don't ever want to do that ever. Wow.
No. Oh yeah, that's incredible. And then Harrington leading the way into the defensive position, literally leading the way in and killing those enemy. Wow. Another tough day for Battle Group Alpha Marines. They were promised close air support and artillery. They don't get it. And so their H hour is until 1100 hours, and the NVA are more than well prepared. And so their attack is blunted, and then NVA does a counterattack. General Abrams actually suggests that the entirety of the South Vietnam Marine Corps has to be disbanded because of the performance of Battle Group Alpha inside the Citadel. Like what? Like, come on, sir. Understand the context, how tough their fighting really is in this western part of the Citadel. Again, they don't have the same tanks. They don't have weapons platforms and the weapon systems, right? So to suggest the disbandment of the entire South Vietnam Marine Corps, come on, sir. Let's keep a straight head here. All right, final days of fighting inside the Citadel. It's largely a South Vietnamese show. So 2nd Battalion, 3rd ARVN Regiment, they do a forward-pass line through Delta Company. They've actually got soldiers on the wall and beside the wall as they do a forward-pass lines through Delta Company and the rest of 1st Battalion. But they now have American support with M48 tanks, M50 Ontos, and 106mm Corvus rifles, which is good. And the Black Panthers and another recon company from the 1st ARVN Division, they do a forward-pass lines through the 3rd ARVN, and they're actually able to get more folks into the Imperial Palace, and they're able to clear it by 1700 hours. And the South Vietnamese Marines actually capture the Hue Gate by 1200. And then on the 25th, the South Vietnamese Marine Corps clears out the southwestern corner. So the battle is now done. And then these 4 U.S. Army battalions are able to get right up now to the Citadel and able to clear the remaining pockets of 5th NVA Regiment soldiers that are now outside of the Citadel itself. All right. So between 26th February and 2nd of March, largely mopping up operations. Bob Thompson sent northeast of the city. And because of his leadership inside the Citadel and northeast of the fighting and during this time period, he's awarded the Navy Cross. Ernest Cheatham Ernest Cheatham of 2.5 and Gravel of 1.1, they finish mopping up around the Phu Cam, and then 2.5 sent to join 1.5 northeast of the city. And then on the 2nd of March, everybody returns to Phu Bai and Camp Evans and all of their original units. All right, so here's the numbers there, Brad. Jeez. Official dates of the battle, I should say. Estimated North Vietnamese Army and Viet Cong casualties. They say 5,000, but again, usually the NVA and the VC would take their casualties out. The Americans, you can see their casualties there, both for the United States Marine Corps and the United States Army. And you can see, look at the Army of the Republic of Vietnam. Look at their casualty numbers, considerably higher, right? Again, they don't have the same weapons and weapons platforms, and so it's they have considerably higher casualties. Civilians, the population of Hue was about 140,000 total. 116,000 are homeless because of all the destruction. 5,800 killed, and the Viet Cong and their assassination program has killed 3,000 civilians. And then you can see the amount of collateral damage there.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like pretty severe. All right, of course, both bridges across the Perfect River and 3 bridges across the Phu Cam are destroyed as well, and they got to rebuild those. All right, lessons learned. So, Brad, when I write, when John Spencer and Liam Collins and I, when we write these chapters for our future book, we include an introduction, and then a battle synopsis, and then we always pick out 2 strategic, 2 operational, and 2 tactical lessons learned, and then we end up with a conclusion. Normally what happens is I write this fulsome chapter, and then we have to cut it down to 5,000 words because that's a constraint from the editor-in-chief of the Modern War Institute. But for our case study on Hue, the 2 strategic lessons was that Hue had to be fought for because it had political and military value. Hue was, politically, socially, culturally, religiously, and militarily important to both the North Vietnamese Army, the Viet Cong, and the Americans in the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, right? And so sometimes cities don't have any military value whatsoever, but, when senior politicians and military leaders say that city is now valuable, it becomes military valuable. Yep. Well, Hue was too valuable to allow the NVA and the VC to seize and occupy it. So it had a lot of political and military value, and that's why they had to fight for it. And finally, the second lesson is that senior political and military leaders have to really assess the situation properly and have patience. It's easy to say that in hindsight.
Yeah,
but because the Tet Offensive, it's this huge attack across the entire country. And it's easy to sit there and go, you sent Alpha Company, 1st Battalion, 1st Marines to go against 2 infantry regiments, inside the city. Like, that's crazy. Again, before you start sending units in, I know everybody's screaming for more people and we're running low on ammunition. And, oh my God, we're being attacked. Before you start sending units in, they might get slaughtered, right? And so before you send units in, try to gather as much information as possible. And because if the Americans had found out that there was 2 regiments inside Hue and another regiment outside of Hue, maybe they would have questioned sending Alpha 11 in so early.
Yeah.
But if you can, and it's very difficult, but if you can, try to assess the situation and have patience, and then send the proper resources in to fight the battle. 2 operational lessons learned: you have to isolate the area of objective. It doesn't matter if you're a platoon with a house, or a company with a building, or a battalion with a street or a suburb, or a brigade with a suburb or a small town, or a division with a city. You have to isolate the urban objective physically and or with firepower, using firepower to fill in the gaps that you can't occupy physically, and on the electromagnetic spectrum, so that you cut off all communications, so the bad guys can't talk to each other. You have to isolate the urban objective. If you do that, then you make the battle shorter. If you leave a gap open, then the enemy reinforces and resupplies, and the battle is much longer, right? Because they have more access to people and weapons and bullets and beans and etc. Right? So the U.S. Army had a tough time clearing out the 5th NVA Regiment, because again, they were scraping up those battalions and putting them in northwest of Hue to try to defeat the 5th NVA Regiment. They had a very tough time isolating the city. But you have to isolate the urban objective to make the battle shorter. If you leave a gap open, as we saw, that battle is going to be longer, and you're going to put more friendly force bodies into body bags, because the battle is now longer and the enemy has more bullets, right? So another operational lesson: there's this urban legend, pun intended. Urban operations, that's an Army thing. And then within the Army, it's like, that's an infantry thing. No, this is Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, if your country has them, Special Operations Forces, logistics, electrical mechanical engineers, signals, medical, intelligence, military police. It's everybody, right? And so the urban environment is no different than any other environment. It's an all-arms battle. Now, remember Dr. Villard's earlier quotation: water had an influence on this battle just as much as walls did, right? As soon as the NVA and the VC started destroying those bridges, and because Mother Nature had the low cloud cover, water now became very important in order to get the bullets and the beans into the Citadel and into New Hue. And because of the water obstacles, you need more Navy support. It may be, in retrospect, if more U.S. Navy assets would have been there, they wouldn't have been able to destroy the bridges. If more U.S. Navy assets would have been there, they would have been able to get more beans and more bullets into the Citadel and into New Hue. All right. So you need everybody involved in this fight. 2 tactical lessons: armor in urban operations is an absolute necessity. Another urban legend, pun intended: you can't use tanks in urban warfare. That is garbage. Okay. Whoever says that keeps failing to tell the military historians, because throughout urban warfare history, there have been numerous battles where tanks and armored personnel carriers and armored fighting vehicles are successfully used in urban operations. You need the firepower in order to destroy, defensive strong points and buildings. The caveat is that you need a symbiotic relationship of protection between the armor and the infantry and the engineers and the artillery. The armor protects the infantry and the engineers and the artillery, and the infantry, engineers, and artillery protect the armor. It's a symbiotic relationship protection. What I don't want to see is the dismounted troops behind the tank doing the conga line thing. That's not protecting the tank, folks, because the bad guys can still sneak up and destroy the tank and destroy the people behind them. So the infantry and the engineers are ahead of the tank, and I've been ahead of a tank when it's fired its cannon, by the way. It's not very pleasant, but they're ahead of the tank and preferably inside the buildings, clearing out those defensive positions while the tanks are firing down range at other defensive positions. That's symbiotic relation protection. You saw it at Ortona.
I was going to say, this is Ortona.
That's Ortona. You see it at Aachen. You see it at Seoul. You see it the Marines fight in Seoul. Like, symbiotic relationship protection. So have armor in the fight. Those M50 Ontos were absolutely fantastic, but they had to be protected.
I was going to say, sorry, just jumping quick, because you mentioned that. I still see that all the time, of this, armor and urban from military historians. It doesn't work. And half a dozen just off the top of my head without thinking. And it's just, you still see this, and then the pundits get on about it. But anyway.
Yeah. All right. And finally, another tactical lesson, and my urban operations brother, John Spencer, is going to really like this one, is the use of CS tear gas in urban operations. Now, tear gas now is considered a chemical, biological, radioactive, nuclear weapon, a CBRN weapon, right? And so now, ironically, our police forces can use tear gas on our citizens, but the military is not allowed to use tear gas in operations, because it's considered a CBRN weapon. And if you start using tear gas, you go down a slippery slope and you start using other CBRN weapons, right? Well, here's my argument. This is an after-action review from 1.5. I do question the dates. Yes, they did go into the fight on the 13th of February, but by the 24th of February, they're pretty much done. So I don't know if that date of 25 February is accurate. But look at this. Look what I've outlined here. 1.5, a total of 16 city blocks, 2 weeks of heavy street fighting with 50% casualties. Then 1.5 on one day took 12 city blocks in 3 hours without a single casualty because the NVA and the VC didn't have gas masks. Like, I'm sorry. If I have to choose the lesser of two evils, firepower or CS gas in order to close with and destroy the enemy, if firepower saves civilian lives because I'm not using them to shoot at buildings where civilians might be located in, or if firepower prevents the destruction of buildings, whereas CS gas does not, maybe CS gas is the better option here. Now, CS gas hasn't been completely banned, but you need very high permissions in order to use it, right? But John and I argue that CS gas is an absolute fundamental because look at this. These numbers prove it right here. 16 city blocks, 2 weeks of heavy fighting, 50% casualties, or 3 hours of fighting, 12 city blocks, and without a casualty. Come on, let's start rethinking our use of tear gas, of CS gas in urban operations, please. All right, now Brad, I think we talked about how I've got a rolling slide here of photos and videos. So, but we can move into a question period now, if you so wish.
Sorry, just 1 second. Here, we had a good one to get. Half the question got covered already. Sorry.
That's good.
Dr. Villard has been basically your co-presenter here.
Oh, outstanding. He's fantastic. Dr. Villard's fantastic.
I can't find it. Well, you can't see it. So, here it is for everyone else. So we had the second part of the question answered about air support for the U.S. CAV units outside Hue. But it was more of kind of an opinion question from you. What do you think of the depiction of the battle in Full Metal Jacket?
Oh, I'll go off on a bit of a tangent because my grandfather's a U.S. Marine, right? And when my grandfather and I were watching that movie, the first 40 minutes of that movie, it's Arlie Ermey being the drill instructor. Yeah. And the first 40 minutes of that movie, my grandfather was laughing because he was like, they've got it and they've got it right. Yeah. So I didn't mind Full Metal Jacket. I didn't mind the depiction of the Hue. I think there's supposed to be 2.5 that's depicted in the Hue. And of course,
I don't remember. Something.
It's I didn't think it was a bad depiction of the urban fighting. It doesn't realistically create what actually happened to 2.5. Like, it doesn't say, I can't remember what company they were with in the movie, but obviously I've just told you here what Golf Hotel and Foxtrot 2.5 were going through. So I didn't mind it because it depicts, the challenges of urban combat. But at the same time, it's not completely historically accurate as to the actual scene. But that's the way Hollywood films are, right? And now, whenever I watch war movies now, I try to look for what they did right because most of what they do in the movie is wrong. So I know as military historians, we're supposed to stand on our pedestals and go, "Why? No, this is wrong and that's wrong."
Yeah, I mean, I've given up all that at all. I'm just like, "Oh, that's fun, or that's cool."
Yeah, exactly. So
no, I know you got a lot of this from Dr. Villard, so maybe this is an area moving forward, or I'm not sure. But were you able to speak with any veterans either side of this?
No, I haven't. But what I would like to do is recommend Mark Bowden's book, Hue. Yeah. Mark Bowden is not a military historian; he's a journalist. Yeah. But what Mark Bowden has been able to do is he's been able to interview American Marines, U.S. Army soldiers, North Vietnamese Army soldiers that participated in the battle, Viet Cong guerrillas that participated in the battle, and civilians who were caught up in the battle as well. Right. So, and because Mark Bowden's a journalist, he's very good at interviewing people. Yes. Right. And so he's been able to interview many of the participants in the battles from both sides. So while I have not been able to do that, Mark Bowden has, and that's a good resource for being able to see all sides of the battle.
Yeah, and Dr. Villard has, I think, hit the head. Oh, wrong one. Hit the head on the nail on the head with this comment. You can't see it, but his book is good in some respects and not in others.
Yes, of course.
Tend to be, but that's nothing new.
Of course, yeah, and I completely agree with Dr. Villard, obviously.
Yes. Yeah, bad at strategic view, better at tactical view, which is also not surprising given his background. But yeah, what was I going to say? I think this has been so extensive, it's hard not to have so many questions left. But what people are basically asking at this point is what is next? And now that you mentioned Soul, people are asking if you're going to do that next as well.
Oh, I mean, there's a number of options here because I mentioned. There's Can you see the video there?
Yeah, we can see the video playing. We just can't hear it.
Okay, good. That was Ron Christmas there when he was a lieutenant colonel and being interviewed. I'll go off on a bit of a tangent first. This is Michael McClear's Vietnam, the 10,000 Day War. It's a documentary series made in the 1980s. And Michael McClear is actually Canadian, and he actually produced this very, very good series. It's a very engaging series because he was able to interview North Vietnamese, Viet Cong, U.S. Marines, U.S. Army, very senior political and military leaders. That's Ron Christmas there as a lieutenant colonel. Ron Christmas goes on to retire as a lieutenant general, as does Ernie Cheatham, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, so absolutely fantastic. Here, let me pop out for a sec. So fantastic series. Yeah, there's the series there. So let me answer this question by doing some shameful self-promotion, Brad.
Of course.
So the U.S. Army 40th Infantry Division's Urban Operations Electronic Library, I now own that pretty much. And what I do is I update it every 2 or 3 months with the latest resources on urban operations. And if you go to that website, I've dumped basically 23 years of resource collection into the website. And you can find case studies on Hue in both the individual and the compilations tabs on that particular site. Of course, I mentioned I write for the Urban Warfare Project along with John Spencer and Liam Collins. And we have a number of case studies, including the Battle of Hue and including the Battle of Ortona there. And of course, Brad, you know me as the Ortona guy. And so Brad and I did a discussion on Ortona there a couple of years back as well. And my thesis is online. These are the other battles I talk about. So Ortona, Italy with Brad from a couple years back. I did Paul Woodage's WW2 TV 3 weeks ago, Woody's WW2 TV YouTube channel, where I talked about the Battle of Aachen. During the 40th Infantry Division Urban Operations Planners course, I do talk about the Battle of Seoul. Okay. I talk about Hue now, both with you, Brad, and at the 40th Infantry Division. And I also talk about the Battle of Mosul with the 40th Infantry Division Urban Ops Planners course. And like I mentioned earlier to you when we were talking privately, I also talk about urban operations in the Russo-Ukrainian War and in the Israeli-Hamas conflict. And for those, that presentation at the very bottom, that's saved for military audiences only. Yes,
because you're still serving in the Canadian Forces.
That's right. Okay. So and then, of course, I'm on X. I'm on X as well. And hey, I'm not the only Canadian interested in Marine Corps history. Your host, Brad St. Croix, also has a fascination with U.S. Marine Corps at Peleliu. And so he's got some YouTube and some X products there that he's created on the U.S. Marine Corps at Peleliu. So I'm not the only Canadian who enjoys the U.S. Marine Corps.
I can't explain it, but I do. I honestly have no idea. I just really find it interesting. I can't not stop thinking about it. Anyway, not about me. Okay, so if you can, we can do 2 real quick ones here.
Yeah.
We can't see it, but hopefully you know what you're talking about. Dr. Villard is asking you to, he says, want to talk about the famous John Olson tank photo from Stars and Stripes, apparently. I'm not sure what that means.
Yeah. So I didn't get into this because this is a fairly lengthy discussion as well. But there's a very well-known photo. I stopped sharing my screen, right, Brad?
Yeah, you closed it out and everything.
Okay. I'm going to have to maybe share it again because I'll bring up the photo. So there's a very famous photo from the Battle of Hue in which, there it is right there.
Yeah, we share it again and I'll pop it back up.
Yeah, no problem.
Or I should just, I have to add it, but anyway, we'll get it.
Share screen. Entire screen. There we go. So can you see my screen now there, Brad?
Yep, there we go.
Okay, so this is the famous photo. And there was some question as to the identity of this fallen U.S. Marine right here. It was believed to be a certain U.S. Marine, but Dr. Villard actually did his own investigation, and he found out that it was another U.S. Marine altogether. And if you actually he's actually produced his own talking piece on this particular photo and the identity of this U.S. Marine right here. Okay. And I don't know the entire full story, but that's what Dr. Villard is. That's the context of this particular photo.
Yeah, it can be hard to fight against those who make these claims and then try to actually get the real information. I can tell you that much.
Yes.
Yeah, and then well, people want you back, so yes, we can have you back if you're willing to come on.
Of course.
And 1 second. As we tend to, I'm going to make the academic thing come out here at the end. As we go towards the end, we like to look back out to the bigger questions, I suppose. And I think this is a good one from Kevin. So given urban combat is necessarily conducted at a more deliberate pace, can strategic considerations / and this is the, I think, big part here, leadership present an impediment to its conduct?
Hold on there, Bray. Have I stopped sharing the screen again?
Yeah, you did.
Okay. Okay, good. So can you just see me now?
Yep.
Okay, good. Okay. It all depends on how well they're educated on urban operations, I suppose. And this is the intent of the 40th Infantry Division Urban Operations Planners course down in Los Angeles, is because that course is for very senior officers and very senior NCOs.
Okay.
To understand the planning, the tactics, and the sustainment of urban operations at the brigade and division level. So it is conducted at a more deliberate pace. Can strategic consideration of leadership present an impediment to its conduct? Yes, if they don't know how urban operations are fought. But that goes for any environment, you know. True. If they don't know how jungle environment is fought, if they don't know how to fight through Arctic or mountain, yes, they can be an impediment. So this is why it's important that they get themselves smart on the environment, regardless of what it is, really.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it, because you can.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it's just because I do this so much, but you see this all the time of push further, push harder from maybe a couple levels up.
Right.
The conditions on the ground are very different. Of course, this is all with hindsight. In some cases, it's actually not. The records show it's not with hindsight in some cases, but that's neither here nor there at this point. But yeah, no, that's it. And then we've got, I can't find it again. But anyway, Ivan, one of our Marines, there's no such thing as a former Marine. I almost said that out loud.
Oh, yeah.
Not myself. Anyway, he said...
I can tell you, Brad, there's a couple of times where my grandfather put me in my place. You know,
I learned that lesson myself.
You can take the man out of the Marines, but you can't take the Marines out of the man.
Anyway, just making a point that the Battle of Fallujah is deserving of some more coverage, or not as well understood as it could be.
Yeah, John and Liam and I have written a case study on Fallujah as well. Perfect. on the Modern War Institute
is
site.
It up? It's up.
And it is, yeah. And in fact, because it was the 20th anniversary of the battle, took 2 days ago, from the 7th of November to the 23rd of December 2004, the MWI, the Modern War Institute, renewed the case study, so it's up there now.
Awesome.
Okay. We did it first and second Fallujah. First and second.
Okay.
We wrote
I was going to say which one, but yeah. No, I think that's it. So that's great. So thanks, Jayson. That was fantastic. I knew it was going to be good, but damn, sorry.
Thank you. And I do apologize for being so long. I'm looking at the time now, but
totally worth it.
I hope it was totally worth it, and I hope I was able to emulate, my discussion about Aachen on Woody's page, on Woody's channel there 3 weeks ago. I was trying to meet that same standard so I wouldn't disappoint people. So
I definitely have not. This is fantastic. So yeah, we'll. I know you're a busy man, but we'll get you back at some point in the hopefully nearish future to talk about. Doesn't even matter. We can pick any of the battles you've covered. I'm not sticking to Canadian anymore, as people know. So
okay.
And yeah, and Dr. Villard, thank you as well if you're still watching with us. Much appreciated you taking care of the sidebar, basically, because of their question. I had no idea. We were there getting technical about jamming comms, and I'm like, this is well out of my
good supporting fires. Good supporting fires from Dr. Villard. Thank you very much, sir.
Definitely. But yeah, we can have him on too and talk about something. He was mentioned. I can't remember the battle off the top of my head. My brain's starting to be a bit mushy, but he's talking about Manila, so that'd be perfect. Actually,
good.
Cover Manila 45. Anyway, yeah, so that's great. So thanks everyone for watching. Everyone, thanks for the super chats and the memberships and everything like that. And if you can support through Patreon, I'm always posting stuff up there all the time. Wow, things I'm working on. It's gonna be a lot of Ortona stuff coming.
I'm looking forward to it.
Digging into that one for sure. Right now, there's a lot of cool stuff I'm finding. So
Good.
Yeah, other than that, thanks everyone for hanging out with us this afternoon or whatever time it is with you are. So enjoy the rest of your weekend, and we'll see you next time. Next time actually is the 13th, having Dave Gribstad come back on, talk about his latest book. We've covered the subject before, but we're going to cover that from the book and really get into the nitty gritty this time about some of the questions also that were left over from last time, if that makes any sense. But yeah, anyway, so thanks again, Jayson, and we'll see everybody next time.
Thank you, Brad, and thank you everybody for attending today.
Oh, thanks. Bye.